Chapter 12:10. Feng Ling knew that she should have only been 0.01 seconds away from death, but she didn't know how anxious and dangerous that scene was in Li Nanheng's eyes. She only saw Li Nanheng crazily hit the car. He didn't even have an airbag in his car. She shouted at him, "Stop, Li Nanheng, stop." After a few more hits, Li Nanheng hit the two SUVs until they were concave in the middle and protruding on both sides. Even if it was reinforced, it was still like a grandchild in front of Li Nanheng's car, especially when Li Nanheng used the strongest part of the car to hit it. Even though it looked like he was crazy, in fact, every hit was accurate and hard. The black Hummer finally stopped. Feng Ling rushed to the car door, only to see Li Nanheng walk out of the severely deformed car door. He grabbed Feng Ling, panting, and pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Li Nanheng, are you crazy?" Feng Ling raised her hand and clutched the clothes on his waist tightly. Thinking of the scene just now, her eyes turned red. "The airbag in your car is gone. You'll be injured. Do you think you're made of iron?" Li Nanheng hugged her tightly as if to make sure she was still in his arms. A moment later, the man's heavy breathing gradually calmed down. He kissed her gently on the side of her neck. "Why didn't you rest in the room? Why did you suddenly run out? You're usually so vigilant. What happened just now?" Feng Ling was about to talk about the text message when she remembered the drunkard just now. She turned her eyes abruptly, only to see that the drunkard was quietly moving out from behind the row of cars in front of them. She suddenly touched the blood on the back of Li Nanheng's hand. She guessed that he had been injured when he tried to pull out his hand from under the airbag and cut the airbag with a dagger. She held her breath, suddenly pulled out a gun from her waist, and shot the drunkard's slowly moving leg. If it weren't for the rule that the base couldn't kill indiscriminately outside except for missions, and the fact that she needed to keep the other party alive to obtain evidence, she really wanted to shoot the drunkard's head. He was obviously in cahoots with the half-dead man in the car. The drunkard was shot in the ankle. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground. He dragged his injured ankle and struggled to crawl out. Feng Ling decisively and quickly fired another shot, hitting the fixed screw under the road sign in Area AB in the parking lot in front of him. The road sign suddenly tilted and fell to the ground. A large blue square blocked the drunkard's way forward. She then turned to look at the SUV and saw an unfamiliar middle-aged man sitting in the driver's seat. However, the other party's head was already bleeding. She didn't know if he was dead or if he still had one last breath left. Just now, Li Nanheng clearly wanted to kill him. "I'll tell you when we get back," Feng Ling said as she retracted her gaze, looked down at Li Nanheng's hands that were still dripping with blood, and then looked up and down at him. "Where are you injured?" Seeing that the man's face was paler than usual, it was obvious that the impact just now had injured him quite badly. "I'm fine," the man said hoarsely and clenched her hand. Obviously, no matter how badly he was injured, it was more important than her unscathed. There was a large local hospital in Los Angeles nearby. After calling the emergency number and calling the police and doctors arrived immediately. This kind of obviously illegal murder didn't need 11 base to deal with it privately. The surveillance cameras in the underground parking lot could clearly restore what happened at the scene, and the police could directly investigate the truth of the whole matter. When the man in the SUV was carried out, he was covered with blood and didn't move at all like a dead man. Thinking of the scene where Li Nanheng's eyes were bloodshot and his face cold again and again, she clenched his wrist tightly, but the man held her hand in his palm. Even the drunkard, who fell to the ground, was taken away by the police. Due to her and Li Nanheng's identity and relationship in 11 base, although they were needed to go with the investigation, seeing that Li Nanheng was injured and Feng Ling's attitude was obviously cold and silent, she was unwilling to go with them for the time being, so she could only say that she would call them when needed. After getting their consent, she took the two people away. The doctor followed them up and entered the hotel room. After a brief examination, he came to a conclusion. In addition to the more than 10 centimeters long wound on Li Nanheng's arm by the dagger, there were also some small wounds on his forehead and the back of his hand by the glass. At that time, the impact was too strong. The car window had been broken, and the broken glass jumped into his flesh. The two cars collided several times in succession with too much force, and Li Nanheng experienced several strong impacts like a car accident at the same time. No matter how strong his physical fitness was, he was still a mortal. He had a slight concussion, but it was not particularly serious. He would be fine after a few days of rest. The doctor carefully took out the glass fragments that jumped into his flesh, applied medicine to the obvious wounds, and left some gauze and anti-inflammatory drugs. After making sure that Li Nanheng was fine, he left. After the doctor left, Feng Ling turned to wash the blood-stained towel. After washing it white, she took it out and continued to help Li Nanheng wipe his face. When she wiped his face, she carefully avoided the small wound on his forehead. She looked at the places on his body that were not serious, but could be considered as external wounds. Then she thought of the scene where he crashed into the car without any regard for his life. Her heart instantly ached a little. This kind of feeling seemed to have occurred to her before. Yes, it was the day when she accidentally heard that Li Nanheng was married. Her whole body was a little numb, and her heart had been twitching. It hurt so much that she didn't even have the strength to cry out in pain. Feng Ling was still helping him wipe, and now she had already wiped his neck. Li Nanheng suddenly raised his hand and held her empty hand. "Don't move," Feng Ling ordered in a low voice. Li Nanheng grunted, closed his eyes, and did not move his head on the pillow. However, his hand still held hers and did not let go. He even inserted his fingers between her fingers and held hers. Even such an intimate action still made Feng Ling unable to calm down. She couldn't figure out what Li Nanheng, a person who had seen too many life and death situations, was thinking at that moment. He was extremely angry and extremely afraid, so he suddenly went crazy. He did it because of her. She knew. It was precisely because she knew that Feng Ling's heart was indescribably shocked. Chapter 12:11. She only knew that Li Nanheng liked her and loved her, but she didn't know that he loved her so much. After wiping all the exposed parts of his clothes, she saw that although the man didn't have much expression, she remembered that before the doctor left, he said that he had a slight concussion. She could see from his unchanging expression that he had a headache, but he didn't show it in front of her. After checking his wounds, she put the towel aside, carefully helped him sit up, turned behind him, and put his head on her lap. Li Nanheng was about to get up, but she pressed him down hard. "Don't move." From watching him hit the car with her own eyes to now, she was like a little woman who had been angry in her heart. Her words were close to an order, as if they were really the main drill master and deputy drill master. Li Nanheng sighed and glanced at her. "I'm really fine." At this time, Feng Ling's hand gently pressed on his head. She didn't know how to do it, but she tried her best to help him relieve his headache with her hands. She slowly rubbed his temples and his head with her fingers. Li Nanheng closed his eyes comfortably, turned his head slightly, and leaned against her lower abdomen. Since he couldn't refuse, he might as well enjoy it like this. "Does it hurt?" Feng Ling wasn't sure how strong her hand was. Seeing that he closed his eyes and didn't speak, she asked in a low voice. At the same time, she glanced at his hand that had been simply stopped bleeding and was covered with a piece of white gauze. Unexpectedly, the man suddenly raised his injured hand and pulled down the head of Feng Ling, who was massaging him seriously. She was afraid that her struggle would hurt his hand too much, so she was suddenly pulled down by his hand. The moment she lowered her head and bent down, the man kissed her hard on her lips. After kissing her, he let go of her. Feng Ling suddenly sat up again and continued to massage his head. She gritted her teeth and warned, "Don't move anymore. Don't you know that you have a headache?" She couldn't remember when she had a slight concussion after returning from a mission. Although she recovered in a few days, she remembered that in the first few days she had a headache and nausea every day and didn't want to move at all. "I'm not that weak. Why are you so nervous?" After the man kissed her, he willingly stopped moving. He rested his head on her lap and looked at her from below. "Tell me, what happened just now?" Feng Ling took out her cell phone and showed it to him. "It's a message from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was a new number that a friend of mine changed to after arriving in Los Angeles. I was a little suspicious and guarded, but the mastermind clearly knew that I would be vigilant and suddenly arranged a drunkard to disturb me. At that time, I was annoyed by the drunkard and couldn't concentrate too much, so this accident happened. I'll pay attention in the future and won't make such a mistake again. Indeed, if Feng Ling's vigilance had been high enough, with her own agility, she would have been able to move back quickly. But at that time, no matter how fast her reaction speed was, it was still no match for the other party's car. If Li Nanheng hadn't bumped into her in time, she would have been directly knocked away. With the speed of the car, she would have been killed on the spot. Now, she wouldn't even have the chance to sit here and take a breath. Li Nanheng felt comfortable being pressed by her and couldn't help closing his eyes again. He only closed his eyes and said lightly, "Have you offended anyone outside the base?" "No, you should know very well how I usually do things. I never cause trouble, and I don't speak much to outsiders. How could I have offended anyone? Usually, the people who don't get along with me are the original members of Team 3, but they have been in the base for so many years, and they can be considered to be above board. Usually, they just want to talk. It's absolutely impossible for them to have the courage to do such an impulsive thing." Li Nanheng was silent for a moment and suddenly opened his eyes, looking at Feng Ling, who was still massaging his head obediently. She didn't offend anyone, so her existence threatened someone's interests, or someone was afraid of her existence. She was someone who even handed over all her bank cards to him. Usually, she was only in the base. How could there be any conflict of interest? The only thing that her existence would really threaten was Feng Mingzhu's inheritance rights in the Feng family, as well as her emotional interests and feelings. In addition, although Li Nanheng was only guessing, the possibility was not low, especially since Feng Mingzhu's actions were exposed last time. It was not impossible for her to go to extremes. He raised his other uninjured hand and touched Feng Ling's eyebrows. "All right, no need to massage." Feng Ling didn't move. She still insisted on massaging him, just wanting to make him more comfortable. The man smiled. "You're moved just like that? You said that I'm made of iron, but I thought your heart was made of iron. You can't see how much I care about you." Feng Ling's expression suddenly became a bit unnatural. While massaging his head, she turned her face away slightly and looked out of the window. At the same time, she said in a low voice, "What do you mean by made of iron? If my heart was really made of iron, I wouldn't have taken the initiative to come out of the base with you. I knew what you were thinking, but I still came out with you." Li Nanheng laughed out loud. If it weren't for the fact that he really didn't have much strength right now, he would have gotten up and pressed her under him. He would have kissed her, hugged her, and fiercely done it a few more times. After massaging for a while, Feng Ling thought that the man had fallen asleep on her lap. Suddenly, she heard him say in a low voice, "Today is just the beginning. The person behind this knows you well and even knows that you're in this hotel right now. I think you've been targeted. After returning to the base tomorrow, don't come out for the time being. Pay attention to the people around you. As for the people outside, focus on Feng Mingzhu." Hearing the words Feng Mingzhu, Feng Ling's hand did not stop. She also thought of this, but she was not sure. If it was really Feng Mingzhu, what was her motive? Was it just because she snatched Li Nanheng away? Or was there something deeper to it? She looked at the man who was lying on her lap with his eyes closed, enjoying her massage, and slowly pursed her lips without batting an eyelid. She always felt that Li Nanheng seemed to know something. Just like when she disguised as a man, he should have long known about it but did not immediately expose it. It was as though nothing could be hidden from him. "Don't worry. Even if it's a sneak attack, no one can easily hurt me," Feng Ling said softly. However, at this moment, the man suddenly raised his hand and pressed her head down. "Come, let me try it." Just as she was about to be kissed, Feng Ling quickly pressed the man's head back down, but she was careful not to make too much movement, lest it aggravate the discomfort of his concussion. However, after lying down for a long time, she guessed that he had recovered a lot, and his face was not as pale as before. Thankfully, his injury was not serious. Otherwise, Feng Ling would not be in the mood to chat with him here. A few minutes later, the landline in the room rang. Feng Ling went to pick up the phone. It was a call from the police. After explaining the matter in detail, they asked if she had offended anyone or if there were any other clues. Feng Ling did not have any evidence, so she could not directly reveal the suspect. She simply told them what she saw and the text message she received. She also told them the number that sent the text message and hung up the phone. This call lasted for about 10 minutes. When she turned back, she saw that Li Nanheng's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep. The doctor did say that a concussion required more sleep and rest. No matter how good this man's stamina was, he didn't sleep at all last night or this morning. After going out, he probably didn't have a good rest. It was good to sleep for a while now. She was about to turn and walk out of the bedroom of the hotel suite when the man on the bed suddenly said, "Be good in the room and don't go out. When the snow on the road is clear tomorrow morning, we'll return to the base. It won't delay the training of the youth team." "Okay," Feng Ling responded. In fact, the balance in her heart was now leaning towards Li Nanheng. She could temporarily ask Han Jin to take care of the newbies in the base for a day or two. However, Li Nanheng's injury was not serious, so there was no need to trouble others, so she didn't say much. She only said, "I'll go get some food. You rest first." Li Nanheng, who was suddenly reduced to being taken care of by Feng Ling, did not speak but curved his lips slightly. Obviously, he was in a good mood. Feng Ling stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window last night and looked at the snow outside. According to the information revealed by the police on the phone just now, the drunkard was really drunk. Although he was conscious of doing something, his thinking and speaking were not very clear. They had to wait until the concentration of alcohol in his body was gone before they interrogated him again. The other driver in the car had been lying in the treatment room since he was taken away. He was almost at his last breath and had not woken up yet. However, they had found out the identity of the driver. He was a local taxi driver in Los Angeles. He had been in gambling debt since last month and owed more than 1 million yuan to Las Vegas. His wife left with their child in a fit of anger. This was the family situation of the man they found out. As for the account under his name, 3 days ago, he received a transfer of 2 million yuan from a mysterious anonymous account. Although the bank had the responsibility to cooperate with the police investigation and should try its best to find out who the mysterious account belonged to, some special banks in Los Angeles had a special system for some particularly rich families. That is, some VIP-level customers could hide their account names. In this case, it was very difficult to find out because this mode of hiding account names could not be found by the bank system. This was the distinguished treatment they gave VIP-level customers, which could be regarded as a loophole that had not been discovered, so there was no way to find out. Feng Ling could think of only a few people who wanted to kill her. Except for the people she had offended in the past, there seemed to be no one else. But if those people wanted to secretly murder her, they definitely wouldn't use such a simple method. Those people were used to violence and blood, and they wouldn't be ruthless and meticulous in doing things. Such a level of treatment in the bank. She picked up her cell phone, opened the locked photo album inside, and looked at the photo of the jade ring and the jade pendant that she had taken, thoughtfully. Chapter 12-13. It was already 3:00 in the afternoon. Although they did not intend to inform the base of this matter, the base had more or less heard some rumors from the police. Feng specially called to ask if the base needed to resolve this matter. He was also concerned about Feng Ling's condition. After confirming that Li Nanheng's injuries were not serious and Feng Ling's emotions were not affected by this murder incident, he hung up the phone. However, before hanging up, he still said that Feng Ling was still a member of the base. In such a situation, the base could help her find the real culprit behind the scenes at any time. If this matter had nothing to do with Feng Mingzhu, it would not be a problem to leave it to the base. But now, even Feng Ling herself suspected Feng Mingzhu. This matter was related to the Feng family and she and the Feng family. In short, it was not the time yet. Li Nanheng raised his wrist that the doctor had bandaged with gauze and comfortably rested on Feng Ling's lap again. If you're tired, close your eyes and sleep for a while. Feng Ling was still rubbing his head with her fingers and gently relaxing his temples and eyes from time to time. This way, his headache would be much better. At this moment, the hotel staff knocked on the door and delivered some ingredients that Feng Ling had asked them to buy. They also prepared some cooked food from the hotel. Feng Ling went to open the door, thanked them, and took the ingredients into the small kitchen in the suite. Although the hotel's kitchen was not big, fortunately, it was well equipped with seasonings and equipment. She had made a living in Boston for the past 2 years. Although she was not very proficient in cooking, she definitely knew how to do it. She washed and cut the fresh ingredients and specially used a pot to boil medicinal chicken soup. This was what she had learned from Xiaoba in High City. At that time, it tasted good, and she remembered the method. She turned around and continued to cut some diced beef. She also used eggs, vegetables, and other ingredients to stir-fry 2 simple side dishes. After making these things, it was not suitable to eat toast or sandwiches. She went to the hotel to ask for some white rice and cooked it. She helped Li Nanheng sit on the bed. His injured hand was placed on the table by the bed, and his other hand was placed on his leg. Feng Ling stood by the bed. She scooped rice with a spoon to feed him, as well as various soups and stir-fried dishes. She fed him slowly, 1 mouthful at a time. However, she was also hungry, so while feeding him, she would occasionally take a few bites. Although she had prepared chopsticks, sometimes she would feed herself with a spoon out of habit. Although she had only done this 2 or 3 times, every time she mistakenly put the spoon he used into her mouth, she would be stunned. She looked up abruptly to see Li Nanheng sitting on the bed with a smile on his face in a very good mood. In this situation, she didn't have time to be shy or anything. She was also very straightforward. She had already done it, and it wasn't the first time. No matter how thin-skinned she was, it was time for her to pass this transition. Thus, she continued to feed him expressionlessly. However, this reminded her of the scene when she was injured or hospitalized in front of him. At that time, Li Nanheng often placed her in the most important position and often stayed by her side to take care of her. In the eyes of others, this cold and inhumane man seemed to really give her all his passion and patience. However, at that time, she always remained somewhat numb and did not respond. She even blindly believed that she should be a man and that nothing beyond her control should happen to her. However, in the end, she still unknowingly fell to this step. At that time, Li Nanheng was cold to her, but now Li Nanheng ate contentedly and hugged her from the bed. He held her waist and held her in his arms, continuing to let her feed him medicinal chicken soup and food. I feel that I see many things too simply. Feng Ling held the bowl and allowed him to hold her like this. As she slowly fed him the soup, she said hesitantly and slowly, "I'm too selfish." She tightened her grip on the spoon. Since some things exist, I may have to face them sooner or later. Even if I don't want to face them, fate doesn't seem to want me to live like this forever. Her words were ambiguous, and most people would not be able to understand what she was saying. However, Li Nanheng heard it. She was thinking about her background and the Feng family. She was considering whether she should bravely face those things that were already close to the truth. But I don't think I'll like those. My world is very small. I can't accept so many complicated people and things. Before she could finish speaking, Li Nanheng suddenly pressed her heavily into his arms. He was originally holding her, so he pressed her heavily against his chest. "Hey, slow down. The soup is going to spill." Feng Ling quickly steadied her hand. Seeing that only a drop of soup flowed along the edge of the bowl and had not spilled out, she quickly struggled out of his arms and wiped the edge of the bowl with a piece of paper. When she turned to look at him, she saw that Li Nanheng had no intention of telling her those things at all. She stared at him and thought of how this man had tortured her in bed last night. She really loved and hated him. In addition, the matter of the Feng family was entangled in her heart. In a moment of emotion, she suddenly opened her mouth and bit hard on his chin. The man was unmoved. When she bit hard, the man raised his uninjured hand to press the back of her head. He lowered his head and rubbed her lips back and forth patiently and gently. Then he used the tip of his tongue to open her lips. Feng Ling reluctantly opened her mouth, but in the end, the man gently pried it open. Then he bit her soft lips and kissed her deeper and deeper. At the end of the kiss, Feng Ling could feel the man's gentleness and pity from this kiss. She could also feel that he seemed to really know something. However, he knew her very well. If she didn't say it, he would never mention it. She had already been kissed so much that she couldn't help but put the bowl in her hand on the table by the side to prevent it from spilling. Seeing that her hand was empty, the man pinched her chin and kissed her for a long time. By the time Feng Ling noticed something, she lowered her head to see that she had unknowingly sat on his lap. Her hands were around his neck, and she took the initiative to respond. Although her response was shaky, the lower part of her body was pressed tightly against his. The man had clearly coughed. "You're so injured, but you can still." She really couldn't say the words, "get hard." Just the first few words were said while panting. When she said it, she even tried to make her expression not look so shy. Chapter 12:14. It's my hand that's injured. It's my head, not here. As the man spoke, he pressed her with his uninjured hand and even straightened his hips. Feng Ling. She hurriedly tried to get down from the man's body, but the man refused to let go. "I know you're tired." "No, I just want to hug you." Li Nanheng didn't want to say that he just wanted to hug the 5-year-old little girl in her soul who was in a daze in the jungle. As he spoke, he hugged her tighter, rubbed the tip of his nose against her white and tender cheeks, and kissed the little dimples on her lips from time to time. There was a small dimple on one side of Feng Ling's mouth, which was not very obvious. She didn't usually like to smile, so it was even more difficult to see, but as long as she smiled, he would see a very shallow little dimple, which added a rare trace of playfulness to her originally cold and noble face. "Your skin is already so good. In the future, you don't need to use those messy skincare products on your face like those women. Now it's smooth and tender. I can see that you don't like to use those things either." "Really? More importantly, beauty is in my heart. Not to mention that you're already very beautiful right now. Even after 10, 20, or 30 years, I still won't get tired of looking at your face. I'll still hold it in my heart and love it, because you're not someone else. You're Feng Ling." The man's kiss gently swept past her dimples and landed on the corner of her lips. He said softly, "So, no matter if you are in the base or face your future with any other identity, you will always be you and will not change. I will always stand in front of you and will not leave. You don't have to be afraid of anything, and don't let your imagination run wild." Feng Ling's expression changed a little. She nodded seriously. In the evening, the two of them did not return to the base. Even if they returned, it would probably be tomorrow morning. In the middle of the night, Nanheng seemed to have a low fever. Feng Ling had heard from Xiao Su in the base that Boss Li rarely got sick in the base, and his physical fitness was definitely top 100. However, after falling into the ice lake at Rogers Pass and having a fever for several days and nights, although Boss still rarely got sick, as long as he had a fever, even if it was only a low fever of about 37.5 degrees, he would still be affected. Especially the last few times Boss Li was injured in the hospital, the most serious was his high fever. Feng Ling borrowed a thermometer from the hotel. After taking it, she saw that it was 37.8 degrees. The fever was not serious. Perhaps the wound on his wrist was stimulated by some of the gas released when the airbag broke. Even though it had been treated, there was still some infection. This temperature was indeed not high, but Li Nanheng did breathe heavily when he was asleep. He should not be very comfortable. He woke up after a while and said that he was a little thirsty. Feng Ling rushed to pour water for him. She had specially boiled the water so that he could drink more hot water. The water was still very hot. She came back with the cup in her hands. It was so hot that she raised one hand to touch her ear from time to time. She swapped hands to touch her ears and quickly walked back to the bed. She blew the water by the bed for a while. Li Nanheng was not in a good state, but when he heard her hissing as she blew the water, he frowned. Fearing that she was scalded, he supported his body with one hand on the bed. Feng Ling knelt on one knee by the bed and fed the water to his mouth. Li Nanheng was about to say something to her, but the water was no longer so hot. He paused and didn't say anything in the end. He drank up the glass of water. "Do you want more?" Feng Ling took out a tissue to wipe the water leaking from the corner of his mouth. Li Nanheng's mouth was a little dry just now, but after being moistened, it was not as pale as before. Enough. The man's voice was slightly hoarse. Obviously, he did not realize that he was having a fever. Sleep early. I'm fine. With that, he closed his eyes. He probably hadn't woken up yet. Feng Ling went to put the cup away and then pressed her slightly cold hand against his forehead. The man closed his eyes and was half asleep. However, feeling the coolness of her hand, he leaned in her direction comfortably. He suddenly turned over, hugged her tightly with both hands, and pressed her down with his legs. Lie down. Don't press your hands. Feng Ling reminded him. She felt that she was leaning against a stove. It was not even 38 degrees, but such a hug still made her feel that this man was as hot as a stove. Li Nanheng did not move. It seemed that he had fallen asleep again. Feng Ling wanted to push him, but she saw that he seemed to be sleeping very peacefully and did not subconsciously frown because of the fever. She did not sleep well last night and had been taking care of him in the afternoon. She was indeed very tired and sleepy. If it weren't for his fever, she would have already laid down beside him and slept for a while. Just sleep like this. Li Nanheng seemed to have fallen asleep, but he suddenly said this. Then he pressed her into his arms and told her to sleep immediately. Feng Ling did not break free. Although the man's body was very hot, his body was still unique to her. Especially when this man left so many marks on her body yesterday. After being kissed and hugged by him for an entire night, she became more and more sensitive to the smell of his body. Now that she was leaning against him, she felt that all the hair on her body stood up and her blood was about to boil. Be good. I don't need to take medicine for a low fever. I know my own body well. I'll be fine tomorrow morning, the man said again, successfully suppressing the worry in Feng Ling's heart. Chapter 12:15. The newbies of Team 1 were still waiting for her to go back for morning training. Since Li Nanheng was fine, of course, she would choose to go back. After all, even if Li Nanheng asked her to be more casual, she thought that she could return to the base now and obtain the identity of an instructor for the newbies. This was a smooth road that Li Nanheng had planned for her. She had to remember her responsibilities and not be too willful and rash. Since she had taken over those newbies, she had to be responsible to the end. However, although he had returned to the base, Li Nanheng received a call and learned that there was a business banquet in Los Angeles in the evening that Li Nanheng needed to attend on behalf of the Li Corporation. Feng Ling saw that he was fine except for his hand injury, and he represented the Li Corporation, so she couldn't interrupt him. She only told him not to touch the water and didn't say much. However, Li Nanheng took the opportunity to ask her to go to the banquet with him tonight when she walked out of the training ground. Feng Ling was about to say no, but he said that Jin Wan would also go tonight with him. Hearing Jin Wan, Feng Ling wavered. Originally, she wanted to stay in the base to teach the few people in her team who were a little slow in training and couldn't keep up with the physical training movements, but she hadn't seen Jin Wan for many days since she came back. She didn't know how Jin Wan was living in the Mo family in Los Angeles recently. She must be very happy with Mr. Mo every day. Feng Ling also missed her. For Jin Wan's sake, she agreed to go to the banquet. After deciding on this matter, Feng Ling turned to return to the training ground. When she looked back, she saw that a few newbies seemed to want to sneak out to rest while she was away, but they didn't expect her to be outside the door. She looked back and saw the two of them. Feng Ling's expression turned cold, and she stared at them like a knife. The two of them. They almost knelt down. In the end, Feng Ling kicked them back to the training ground with a cold face and punished them to do 300 push-ups on the spot. In the end, the two of them were so tired that they lay on the ground like dead dogs and could not move. In the next hour, the news that Feng Ling and the deputy drill master were chatting intimately outside the training ground suddenly spread in their team. Everyone suspected that the deputy drill master fawned on drill master Feng because of his looks. How could drill master Feng be so easily won over by a man? How could she fall in love? She must not fall in love. The deputy drill master must be chasing after her. The group of people trained and brainwashed themselves, but Feng Ling stood calmly in front of the door and looked at each of them. Whoever made a wrong move, she casually threw a stone at the numbing acupoint on the other party's arm. In an instant, the other party stood up straight and did not dare to be careless at all. Noon, base cafeteria. Feng Ling was eating. Since Wan Ku was warned, he didn't continue to show his existence around her, but Feng Ling actually didn't hate him, so she nodded to him when she saw him. However, at this moment, several other boys who were not afraid of death sat by her side with plates and asked her questions from time to time. At first, Feng Ling answered a few words, but later, these people asked her why she suddenly put on a high-collared shirt. Although it snowed yesterday, it was very warm to wear a uniform in the base. She didn't need to wear too thick clothes, but she even wore a high-collared shirt. They even asked her if she was afraid of the cold. Feng Ling calmly touched her collar, lest the bite marks left by a certain bastard would be seen. If they were seen, she really wouldn't have the face to pretend to be aloof in front of this group of newcomers and think of a way to suppress them. Well, I'm afraid of the cold, she explained coldly and then frowned. Are you all very free? Why are you all surrounding me? Why are you all surrounding me? I've been worried about you on the training ground all morning. Can't you leave me alone for a while at noon? Seeing that she was about to lose her temper, they quickly retreated from the scene. They had wanted to ask a few questions about her and the deputy drill master, but in the end, they found that they didn't have a chance to ask. Because Feng Ling was almost murdered in the hotel, Li Nanheng still needed to personally investigate the situation. He had to investigate all aspects, including the bank. So he didn't come to train these newbies this morning. Feng Ling thought that he would go out with him to attend a banquet in the evening, and she would train them by herself in the afternoon. In the end, when she was finally able to have a quiet meal alone, a certain deputy drill master appeared in front of her. Seeing that the man did not eat and only took a cup of coffee to sit down, she raised her eyes to look at him. At the same time, she suddenly felt that the newcomers were quietly looking at her from all directions. They were curious about who the deputy drill master was and wanted to know if there was anything fishy between the deputy drill master and her. Feng Ling retracted her gaze, only to see that the man was looking at her calmly, as if there was no one else around him. She glanced at the coffee cup in his hand and whispered, "You just had a fever last night. Why are you drinking coffee today? Do you think I'm sick? It's just a minor headache and fever, but I've already recovered in the morning." The man picked up the cup and took a sip. Obviously, he had long sensed the gazes around him, but he had always been calmer than Feng Ling in such matters. He did not show any change in his emotions and continued to drink his coffee without being affected in the slightest. It seemed as though everyone's gaze had nothing to do with him. "You don't come to the base cafeteria to eat. Why are you sitting here?" Feng Ling whispered to remind him to behave in front of the newbies. The man just glanced at her and said indifferently, "After many investigations and bank records, we have found the person who transferred the money to the SUV driver." "Who is it?" Feng Ling paused and looked up at him. Li Nanheng looked at her silently for a moment, as if some deeper truth was about to be revealed. In fact, Feng Ling also knew that if it was really Feng Mingzhu, it meant that she was really a member of the Feng family. Otherwise, Feng Mingzhu would just be jealous and wouldn't bribe someone to kill her. If it was really her, she didn't even need to ask. Everything would be clear. Li Nanheng's slender fingers slowly rubbed the wall of the cup. He said, "Feng Mingzhu. The plot has already begun to advance at full speed. Dear friends, after watching for so long, you should be able to see that the various torture scenes you thought were actually not torture. There are no terrible torture scenes, so you don't have to worry too much about any disgusting scenes happening in the later stage. Of course, it's necessary to have both sweetness and torture, but it will definitely be very exciting. Sweetheart, I suggest throwing monthly votes at Qingqing's head." Chapter 12:16. When the truth came, Feng Ling found that she was much calmer than she had imagined. Li Nanheng didn't hesitate for a moment. Obviously, he had already seen that she was prepared. Feng Ling was silent for a long time and didn't say anything. She lowered her head and ate a few more mouthfuls. After saying that name, Li Nanheng didn't speak again, nor did he drink any more coffee. He just looked at her patiently. After eating a few more mouthfuls, she put down her chopsticks and said in a low voice, "I saw Mrs. Feng a while ago. She said that Feng Mingzhu went abroad with her friends to relax. Relaxing doesn't mean living outside for a long time. She came back long ago." That's right. She had never thought about Feng Mingzhu's matter. She had a vague idea of many things, but at this moment, she was clearer than ever. After a moment of silence, she looked up at him. "What do you know?" Li Nanheng's eyes were indifferent, but there was some patience and gentleness that only she could see. "I know what you know and what you don't know." Feng Ling, so? Now perhaps it was time to uncover the truth, such as the blood relationship between her and the Feng family that had been tested by DNA, and the cenotaph he married 3 years ago was her. But right now, all of Feng Ling's thoughts and energy were occupied by the work of the youth team. She was too responsible for these team members, and all of a sudden, everything fell on her head. No matter how strong her heart was, she wouldn't be able to digest it so easily. "After the assessment of the newcomer team next week, when everything is settled, I'll show you something." Li Nanheng tapped his fingers on the coffee cup and looked straight into her eyes. "Focus on what you're doing first. Don't think too much. This kind of petty scheme can't hurt you at all. As long as you're vigilant enough, that kind of young lady who's been raised in a boudoir is no match for you at all. But you're injured." Li Nanheng sneered, leaned his upper body against the table, and leaned forward toward her. Although he didn't lean too close, his sudden move still attracted the attention and curious gazes of the newcomers in the cafeteria. He ignored the gazes around him and looked at her. "Does your heart ache?" Feng Ling sat there without moving. "I was very distressed at that time. I didn't hide it." Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction, but he said, "It's my fault. At that time, I saw that the car was about to collide with us, so I was impulsive. Otherwise, why would I hurt myself when I could have solved the problem with one shot? However, at that time, there was a car between them, and it was useless to shoot. Even if they managed to burst the car's tires, the car would still be able to kill Feng Ling with its inertia. Thus, it was useless to shoot at that time unless they used the front of their car to crash into it head-on." Fortunately, Li Nanheng's injury was not serious. He only had a slight cut on his hand and a shock, but it was not a big problem. He would recover in a few days. Feng Ling suddenly turned to look at the people around her, only to see that the newcomers were looking at her and Li Nanheng with curiosity and gossip in their eyes. It seemed that they had finally confirmed that there was definitely something going on between her and this deputy drill master whose identity she didn't know. She suddenly retracted her gaze and looked at him. "If you're done, you can go now." When Li Nanheng heard this, he immediately raised his eyebrows coldly. "You want me to let you go after using you? Isn't she the one who cried and called me husband that night?" "Feng Ling." Li Nanheng's voice was not loud, and no one else dared to sit at this table, so of course no one else could hear him. However, the effect of this sentence still caused Feng Ling's spine to heat up. She couldn't believe it but seemed to have some impression of it. When did I ever call you that?" The little woman had been oppressed by him on the bed for a long time, and in the end, her voice was hoarse from shouting. After being stimulated several times, she became extremely obedient in the end. He coaxed her into saying whatever he wanted her to say. At that time, she was really forced to call him hubby a few times. She even called him Big Brother Nanheng several times with a face full of shame and embarrassment. "Pretending to have amnesia? Are you going to rest outside after the banquet tonight to help Zhang Yan recall her memories?" "Feng Ling, you just had a concussion yesterday. You're really worthy of the word beast. My own woman moves around in front of me every day, especially in the base. I can see her, but can't touch her. I've been holding it in for so long. After leaving the base, it's better to be a beast than a beast." Feng Ling couldn't win against him, so she simply ignored him and warned him not to get too close to her in front of so many newcomers. Li Nanheng looked at the high-collared shirt she was wearing and smiled. He didn't go too far and followed her instructions. Night. Los Angeles, a business dinner party. Feng Ling didn't want to change her clothes. Anyway, she just thought she was Li Nanheng's attendant or bodyguard. She certainly wouldn't appear in such a place in a gown like other women. Li Nanheng let her be. He represented the Li Corporation tonight, not 11 base, so he changed into a suit so as not to be disrespectful to the organizer. As for Fengling, he would let her wear the uniform if she wanted to. He didn't want others to see her amazing side. It was enough for her to stay quietly by his side. That night, Jinwan did go with Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's injury in Cambodia had already healed a lot. Recently, the couple had been staying at the Mo family in Los Angeles. Fengling didn't know much about the situation there, but she heard that Chairman Mo had to accept Jinwan due to Mo Jingshan's pressure, and Mrs. Mo, Ms. Wanju, liked Jinwan very much, so they got along well. Seeing the pregnant Jinwan appear in the banquet hall with Mo Jingshan with a red face and bright eyes, Fengling knew that she was in a good mood recently, and everything was fine. While Li Nanheng was talking with others, Fengling took the time to say hello to Jinwan. After a while, she was taken away by Li Nanheng. As they chatted, she was pushed into a corner of the banquet hall by this man, who couldn't help being horny as long as he left the base. He pressed her against the wall and lowered his head to whisper in her ear all kinds of embarrassing words that made her so angry that she bit him twice. However, there was an important call on Li Nanheng's cell phone. The banquet hall was too noisy, so he turned to answer the call. Only then did she catch her breath. She looked around the banquet hall and suddenly found that Jinwan had disappeared. Chapter 12:17. Fengling's eyelids twitched. She had been with Jinwan for a long time and had instinctively sensed the danger around Jinwan. Suddenly, she heard a scream from the direction of the bathroom. The scream didn't sound like Jinwan, but the scream was drowned out by the lively banquet hall. Only Fengling, who had just walked to the bathroom, could hear it clearly. She walked quickly to the bathroom and was about to push it open, only to find that the door was locked from the inside. Mrs. Mo? Is she inside? Fengling frowned, leaned against the door, and asked, Jinwan? It was quiet inside and no one answered. Even the person who screamed just now was silent. She suddenly raised her foot and kicked the door hard, and the loud crash shocked everyone in the banquet hall. As the bathroom door lock was broken, Fengling quickly pushed the door open and searched inside with her sharp eyes, only to find that there was no one in the bathroom. The scream just now was not Jinwan, but the things scattered on the floor of the bathroom were Jinwan's. Jinwan and Su Shui were both taken away at this banquet. However, the most unexpected thing was that Mr. Mo, who had always planned everything, was finally in a passive position in this disaster. Worried about Jinwan's safety because she was pregnant, he searched for Jinwan overnight. It was not until dawn that he finally found some clues and learned the purpose of the person who instructed them to kill Jinwan and Su Shui. Ignoring the wound on his back that had not fully recovered, Mr. Mo drove directly to a certain highway in Los Angeles. A few people from 11 Base arrived, and everyone drove to the highway, intending to attack from all sides. However, there was only one highway and there was no way to get to the highway in a short distance, so they could only chase after them. If Fengling could predict the result in advance, she would rather have been the one rushing to the front of the truck than to see Mr. Mo covered in blood and unconscious in the deformed car, or to see the pool of blood flowing out of Jinwan's lower body. At that time, their car was following closely behind, and as they chased, they found that the speeding giant truck had been chasing in the direction of the car where Jinwan and Su Shui were kidnapped. In Li Nanheng's car, Fengling sat on the passenger seat and stared in that direction with a frown. Li Nanheng saw that the car was filled with killing intent earlier than her. He did not bat an eyelid but sped up. However, Li Nanheng's hand had just been injured and was wrapped in gauze, so he could not control the steering wheel as flexibly as usual. Just when Li Nanheng couldn't stop the tragedy from happening, Mr. Mo's black Bentley suddenly rushed forward at a terrifying speed. At that time, Fengling had a deep impression of him. She suddenly heard Li Nanheng say hoarsely, Fengling, close your eyes. However, before he finished speaking, the two cars collided and the huge shock shook the entire highway. Fengling clearly felt that Li Nanheng was so angry that he almost lost control of the car. She quickly rushed forward with a stiff face, only to see that the black Bentley had been smashed into a horrible and strange shape. Mr. Mo must be dead. Li Nanheng's eyes turned red. He immediately took off the gauze on his wrist, threw it at his feet, and jumped out of the car to solve the situation. Feng Ling's mind went blank. She looked at the Bentley and suddenly turned to look at Jean Wan, who had fallen on the highway, and hurriedly got out of the car to help her up. She couldn't forget Jean Wan's heart-wrenching cries at that time. She couldn't forget the gasoline flowing out of the black Bentley mixed with the scarlet blood. She couldn't forget the blood flowing out of Jean Wan's lower body before she fainted. She couldn't forget the scene when Li Nanheng pulled out a gun and pointed it at the driver in the giant truck with red eyes, wanting to shoot hundreds of holes in his body, but Kay and the others held him tightly and stopped him. The truth hadn't been found out. Even if the people of 11 Base had the right to hold guns, even if Mr. Mo was in the other car, even if everyone wanted to blow up that car, everyone knew that if Li Nanheng really shot at that time, 11 Base and Li Nanheng would be implicated, so they wouldn't be able to help Mr. Mo at all and would only make the whole thing more complicated. Li Nanheng knew the seriousness of the whole thing better than anyone else, but Kay and the others could see that Boss Li was really angry. He almost shot, but several brothers stepped forward to stop him, grabbed his wrist, and pressed his hand hard to stop him from shooting. After a few seconds of silence, Li Nanheng came to his senses at a speed beyond anyone's imagination. He coldly ordered everyone to sort out the evidence at the scene, pry open the Bentley door, and find a way to rescue Mr. Mo. Feng Ling couldn't go there to help now. Jean Wan, who had fainted because of the great sadness, fear, and miscarriage, was enough to make her heart ache. After taking Jean Wan into the car, she looked in the rearview mirror at the Bentley that the brothers of 11 Base had pried open and at Mr. Mo's body, which was carefully carried out of the car. There was blood everywhere. Blood. Seeing this, Feng Ling's heart ached, and she drove Jean Wan to the hospital first. This incident caused a stir in the lives of Mr. and Mrs. Mo and shocked the Mo family in Los Angeles. When Director Mo and Ms. Wanju arrived at the hospital, Jean Wan had just had an abortion and was still unconscious. Mr. Mo was still in emergency treatment, and his condition was unknown. In the short time of watching over Jean Wan in the hospital, Feng Ling's heart sank to the bottom. She couldn't accept that such a thing would suddenly happen to Mr. and Mrs. Mo, who were so happy and loving. Mr. Mo couldn't die. Otherwise, how could Jean Wan live? But the only thing Feng Ling could do now was to go to the hospital to accompany Jean Wan when she had time. After all, this was Los Angeles, and Director Mo and Ms. Wanju were in the hospital every day. She couldn't make any decisions for Jean Wan and Mr. Mo, especially when Ms. Wanju sat in Jean Wan's ward and kept holding back her tears. Feng Ling could do nothing but stand quietly and watch. In the face of life and death, people were really too small. Sometimes, Feng Ling thought of Su Shui, who died on the highway, thought of Su Jilan, and thought of the scene when Mr. Mo's Bentley was hit on the highway. Sometimes, she thought of the SUV that rushed straight at her in the underground parking lot of the hotel that day. She couldn't understand. If she was really the daughter of the Feng family, no matter how dissatisfied Feng Mingzhu was with her, she was still her biological sister. How could her biological sister want to kill her? Chapter 12:18. She couldn't figure out many things related to life and human nature, which lingered in her heart and made her suffer from insomnia several times. So after staying in the hospital for 3 days and suffering from insomnia, she finally sat down on the bench in the hospital corridor and fell asleep with her eyes closed. When she woke up, she found that she had been sent back to 11 Base and was lying in her own room upstairs in the base hall. She closed her eyes, thinking that she had just had a nightmare, but then Kay called her. "Feng Ling, you've been in the hospital for 3 days. Boss asked me to send you back to rest. The newcomers are going to take the assessment soon. Don't come to the hospital for the next few days." Kay said, "There's no need to stay in the hospital like this. Jean Wan's miscarriage has become a fact, and Mr. Mo is not out of danger yet. Our brothers and the people of Shine Group are here. Don't worry, we can help you. You will collapse if you stay like this. Boss is busy dealing with the affairs of the Mo family and the Su family, as well as the murder. He can't find time to go back these 2 days. Stay in the base and don't let us worry about you." Of course, Feng Ling knew that it was useless for her to stay in Jin Wan's ward, but when she saw Jin Wan sitting silently on the bed after waking up, looking very calm and not crying, she felt even more uncomfortable. But it was true that the brothers of the base had all been there. Li Nanheng had seen this with his own eyes, and it was about Mr. Mo. He couldn't stand by and let the whole thing be handled by various parties. Even if she went there, Jin Wan wouldn't talk to anyone. She just stood by. In the face of life and death, nothing mattered. Feng Ling was under a lot of pressure. After hanging up the phone, she lay on the bed, thinking that she couldn't fall asleep, but she was really too tired these days. She thought about what happened to Jin Wan in the past few days, and the scenes on the highway that day, and finally fell asleep. When she woke up in the afternoon, she was in a much better state of mind. She went out of the room and met Ah Feng downstairs. Ah Feng gave her an understanding look. "I know you have a good relationship with Mrs. Mo. Now that something happened to Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo, you can't calm down for a while. I can understand. If you really don't have the energy to continue teaching, I can send someone else to teach you, but don't go back to the hospital. Boss specifically told me not to leave the base, to eat and rest on time, and not to stay up night after night. It's okay. I'm much better after a day's rest. I'll call the hospital in the evening. Tomorrow morning training will be carried out as usual, and the assessment will be held soon. I have to live up to the efforts of the newcomers," Feng Ling said softly. Ah Feng nodded. "If you think you can adjust your mood and state well, of course, no one can replace your position in the hearts of the members. Since it has happened, we can only solve it. The brothers in the base are used to life and death. I believe they can adjust their state well." Feng Ling didn't speak anymore but walked out in silence, sitting on the stone bench outside the base hall for an afternoon and an evening. The next day, when it was time for morning training, the members of Team 1, who had been training by themselves for 3 days, were surprised to find that Drill Master Feng Ling, who had been missing for 3 days, had come back and was waiting for them in the training ground as early as before. The group of newcomers hurried into the training ground for morning training. However, because Feng Ling was not around in the past few days, a few bad-tempered people who liked to say angry words said that the assessment was coming soon. A few days ago, the 2 drill masters were not around, and they thought that their team had been abandoned, causing the atmosphere in the entire team to be a little gloomy. It was as though they were really going to be abandoned. Even when they were training, they could not give them any energy. Looking at their state, Feng Ling narrowed her eyes coldly. Mo Jingshan was not out of danger yet. Tubes of various colors were inserted all over his body, and he was surrounded by medical equipment. In the enclosed ICU, even the glass windows outside the ward were not allowed to enter. Every day, there was only 1 or 2 hours when they could see the people inside through the glass windows. All the top doctors in the world were gathered here, trying to save people, but the waiting time was the longest. Whether he could survive or not depended on whether he could hold on to his last breath or not. In the next few days, Feng Ling stayed in the ward for a few days, and Li Nanheng almost didn't sleep. He ran around and was worried about the hospital. The accident made almost all his acquaintances lose a lot of weight, especially Jin Wan, who had just had a miscarriage. Everyone was worried that she would take things too hard, but they found that she seemed to be calmer than everyone else and didn't need anyone to worry about her at all. In the face of such a major accident, she was so sensible that it made people's hearts ache. He looked at Mo Jingshan outside the ICU again. When he came out again, Li Nanheng pinched between his eyebrows, and Kay came over. "Boss, just now the base called and said that Feng Ling has returned to the youth training team. His mental state seems to have returned to normal, but the ignorant members of the youth training team often speak with dissatisfaction and are very negative. They feel that they may not be able to get good results in this newcomer assessment." Speaking of this, Kay continued angrily, "It's really a waste of Feng Ling's effort to teach them. She gets up earlier than them and sleeps later than them every day. It's just that she stayed in the hospital for 3 days and couldn't go back. In the end, they all became ingrates. Damn." Listening to this, Li Nanheng walked to the smoking room at the end of the hospital corridor, lit a cigarette, and put it in his mouth. With the strength of the cigarette, he recovered a little, looked down at the time and said, "How many days before the newcomer assessment?" "4 days, on Sunday." A puff of white smoke came out of the man's mouth. "Since she has the ability to teach 20 disobedient boys a lesson, she will be able to teach them a lesson again. Don't worry, she has her own way of doing things." "I know Fengling is fine, but isn't she still worried about Jinwan? I'm afraid she'll be under too much pressure. If she's really bullied by those insensible brats, my heart will ache." As soon as Kay said this, he suddenly paused. Seeing Bosley squinting at him meaningfully with a cigarette in his mouth, Kay hurriedly said with a strong desire to survive, "Well, it's because we are worried about each other." Li Nanheng sneered. "I know better than my own woman whether she can bear the burden on her shoulders or not. Don't worry about her, and go to work." "Okay." Chapter 12-19. Don't be depressed. Drillmaster Fengling has repeatedly emphasized that our team's overall training performance and level are higher than that of Team 2. We will definitely get a good result in the assessment. Why are you still so suspicious? Although Drillmaster Feng is indeed very good, very professional, very cool, and indeed very strict when she is strict, she is, after all, a woman. Recently, I often see her sitting there in a daze alone. Women are really too emotional. I don't know what she is thinking about. Anyway, it definitely has nothing to do with us. I think she just took the time to come back to brush us off. She doesn't care about us at all. That's right. That's right. That's right. All right, don't say such things. Have you forgotten that she was taken out to do devil training 2 days ago? Do you think she didn't hear you? She just doesn't want to argue with you. Be content. We usually practice well. Hey, look at her face today. It's very bad. I don't know if something happened to her, or if she's in love. That's why she looks so unstable. Don't say that. Drillmaster Fengling was fine a few days ago. I think she's not feeling well today. Women are so troublesome. They have all kinds of reasons every day. TSK. On the day of the rookie assessment, Li Nanheng finally rushed back from the hospital. In order not to affect the psychological state of these rookies or Fengling, he kept a low profile when he came back and didn't tell anyone. When the rookies began to compete with each other on the field, he found a place to sit beside the members of Team 1. But he heard a few people discussing in low voices around him. Han Jin, who was also sitting next to him, looked back at those people, frowned, and whispered in Li Nanheng's ear, "These unsatisfied brats." Fengling is a person who keeps things to herself. She is too worried about Mr. and Mrs. Mo, so it's impossible for her to explain to these rookies, so even if she misunderstood them, she didn't say anything. She still trained very responsibly, every day. I don't know what these brats are thinking. Just because Fengling often sits there alone and doesn't say anything recently, they insist that Drillmaster Fengling is a woman, so she has too many things on her mind and doesn't have much time to train them. The overall condition of this team is good, but after all, there are still a few troublemakers. Can't they see that Fengling gets up earlier than them every day and sleeps later than them? Or can't they see that every time they train, she is very responsible for adjusting their postures for them one by one? When she has a little private time, she will be alone for a while, or take time to call Jinwan and feel sorry for her for a while. How can it be considered unprofessional? She's a woman, so it's wrong? Damn. If I were the referee this time, I would ***king kick all these ignorant brats out of the base. None of them can officially enter the base. A group of idiots who don't understand human language. Li Nanheng sat quietly on the steps next to the team members, looking at the direction where Fengling stood, and did not speak. A few of the team members saw him, but they had always been a little afraid of this deputy drill master who could make them vomit blood as soon as he appeared, so they didn't dare to talk anymore. When they passed by him, they nodded to him awkwardly and then quickly walked away in front of him. Xiao Su also came over. Ah Feng was presiding over the assessment in the field and couldn't come over. When he approached, he asked in a low voice, "Boss, don't you plan to go to the front for the assessment? They still don't know that you are back, and Fengling is still in the front. How is the hospital? Mr. Mo. Sitting here can more intuitively see more of the real side, Li Nanheng said lazily. Mo Jingshen is out of danger, but he hasn't woken up yet.
Xiao Su sighed.
Anyway, it's good that he is out of danger, which means that he is one step closer to waking up. During the intermission of the assessment, Feng Ling disappeared. Li Nanheng took a look at the time and got up to go to the bathroom. When he passed by the women's bathroom specially set up for Feng Ling, he heard footsteps inside. Considering that it was now the assessment period, she didn't have the energy to deal with too many things. Seeing that he was back, she would definitely ask more about Mo Jingshen and Jin Wan. So, he didn't show up but went to the men's bathroom and stood for a while. When Li Nanheng turned into the bathroom, Feng Ling happened to come out from the opposite side. She seemed to be in a good state of mind. She was dressed in a black battle uniform. The design of the uniform for the past 2 years was a little tight, showing off her figure. Wearing it on her body, she had curves in all the right places. Amidst the coldness and elegance, there was a unique sense of sexiness hidden under her clothes. Feng Ling, who was usually serious in the base, was the only one who knew how perfect and sexy her figure was after taking off her clothes. Feng Ling seemed to have just washed her face in the bathroom, and her chin was still dripping with water. She wiped it with a paper and walked out, holding a small pack of sanitary napkins in her hand, which she put into a pocket as she walked. No wonder her condition was fine, but her complexion was so pale. No wonder the troublemaker in the youth training team said that she didn't look well today. She should be on her period. The things she experienced in the past few days and the psychological pressure made her period a little heavier this time. She was obviously very uncomfortable. Sure enough, when Feng Ling was about to walk out of the bathroom, she suddenly stopped, raised her hand to her stomach, and stood there for a long time. Seeing that she had a stomachache, Li Nanheng came out of the bathroom and went over to support her arm. If you're not feeling well, go back to rest. I'll watch them in the second half. Feng Ling was startled by the person who suddenly appeared next to her and turned her head sharply. When she saw it was Li Nanheng, she was even more surprised. Aren't you in the hospital? When did you come back? You've worked so hard to train such a team. It wasn't easy for them to survive until the day of the assessment. Of course, I'll come back at such an important time. Li Nanheng looked at her hand that was moving away from her stomach. Period? Feng Ling nodded.
Hun.
I'll send you back to rest. No need. Feng Ling quickly stood firm and didn't let him help her walk. There was no one near the bathroom. She took a deep breath to relieve the discomfort in her abdomen and then said, "Just now, I felt that someone was looking at me in the men's bathroom. I thought you couldn't come back because there were too many things in the hospital. I thought someone in the base saw me and hid inside. I didn't expect it to be you." Surprised? The man asked with a smile. Chapter 12:20. Are you surprised? The man asked with a smile. Of course she was surprised. She had been in a bad mood these days, and Li Nanheng had not returned to the base. Now that she suddenly saw him back, she was definitely surprised and happy. However, in the first half of the assessment results of her subordinates were not ideal. Although they could win some points in the afternoon, Feng Ling was really worried about the newcomers on the field and couldn't care too much about her personal feelings. Li Nanheng recalled what he had heard from the training team and felt as if someone had stabbed his heart twice. Feng Ling was unwilling to return to the base because of her gender. She was afraid that all her efforts would not be understood in the eyes of others. In the end, this group of brothers in the base was too familiar with her and basically did not have any negative comments, but she did not expect a group of ignorant newcomers to be so arrogant. All her hard work and efforts in the past month seemed to have become wrong because she was a woman and because she was in a bad mood recently. The point was why this woman kept everything to herself. She was clearly in a bad mood, but she still smiled at him and did not even complain about her grievances. Now that she saw that he had finally come back, shouldn't she hug him immediately, crying for her husband and asking him to help her teach those ignorant brats a lesson? But she just didn't say it. Feng Ling still remembered that he said that after the assessment was over, he would show her something. She could roughly guess what it was, but now she was not in the mood to think about it. Hearing the gunshot from the training ground indicating that the second half was about to begin, she hurriedly walked out. Li Nanheng did not stop her. He knew very well how serious his woman was. If she said she didn't need to rest, he couldn't stop her. The second half of the assessment had not begun yet, and they had only entered the preparation process. In fact, the overall strength of the first team led by Feng Ling was really good. However, in recent days, a 17-year-old boy named Verum had been caught by her slacking off several times and was dragged out to train by her alone. One time, he lay on the training ground and did not move. Feng Ling just looked at him coldly and told him to get up. Perhaps people's acceptance was different. Back then, Li Nanheng treated her mercilessly, so he honed her into a sharp sword. However, this child named Verum was different. He only felt that he was being targeted and hated her. He often talked to several newcomers in the team in private. As for what they talked about, she roughly knew a little. They were just nitpicking on her, but it was not appropriate for them to say anything to her face, so she could only say something in secret. The assessment was about to begin, so Feng Ling did not pay much attention to him. However, because she had seen the results of the newcomers in the first half, it was obvious that they were not at their normal level. At this time, if they thought that they were not the one to be valued, they did not go all out during the assessment, or even held back, they would definitely lose. Especially Verum, who had been secretly affecting the mood of the team members recently. The second half began. There were a total of 10 rounds of sparring in the second half. They were all competing on the physical fitness and movement standards of the newcomers who had just been trained for a month, as well as their proficiency in many coherent gun-holding movements. In short, it was more crucial than the first half, and scored the highest. However, after 4 consecutive matches, the average score of the first team had always been at a disadvantage. Of course, the difference was not very big. They clearly had more room for improvement. During the assessment, only Verum's score was the lowest. He seemed to be taking revenge on Feng Ling for the devil training she had given him, as well as for Feng Ling's ruthlessness when training them. He knew that if the overall score of Team 1 couldn't increase, almost all the members of the team would be screened out. Only a few people could officially enter the base. If he was just talking nonsense in the team 2 days ago, now that he was deliberately lowering the score on the field, he was really doing it on purpose. Li Nanheng, who was watching the battle from afar, had already seen the situation in the field. He narrowed his eyes coldly. In fact, based on Feng Ling's training method, the people under her should be very outstanding. However, young men at this age were too arrogant. If they were unhappy, they would spend several times more energy to fight against one person. They could clearly let the whole team enter, but someone deliberately lowered the score and made Feng Ling's face ugly. This was the first time Feng Ling had led a team after returning to the base, and it was also the first time she had taken an assessment. If she lost at this time, even if she could bear it, she would not stay. In the middle of the second half, there was another 10 minutes of rest. Li Nanheng paid attention to Feng Ling's state the whole time. Feng Ling looked fine on the surface. From the beginning to the end, she could see the situation. She was not unhappy, but her eyes were still very cold. Right now, the second team was 20 points higher than the first team, and there were only 5 matches left. It was almost impossible for them to win, unless all 5 of their members could perfectly obtain full marks in the last 5 matches. Only then would they be able to turn the situation around and win by a narrow margin. However, looking at the situation, it was already not easy to persevere through the assessment. It would not be easy to obtain full marks in the last 5 matches. Li Nanheng went to the viewing room where Ah Feng and the others were. He pulled out the surveillance footage and looked at the person named Verum for a while. He asked coldly, "Where's Feng Ling?" Feng Ling asked Verum to go to the back to talk. Ah Feng knew that Li Nanheng could see the problem because of his identity as the boss of the base, but he couldn't be biased, so he didn't say anything. However, the boy's purpose was too obvious. "I don't think Feng Ling is too nervous. I don't know how she can negotiate with that Verum. That boy used to be the type who didn't listen to anyone outside. His personality is not easy to control." Li Nanheng sneered. "Those who can't accept it should get out of the base as soon as possible, wasting time and dragging the other 19 people down. Only Feng Ling's temper can suppress it. If it were Han Jin, Would he drag him to the back and beat him half to death before revoking his assessment right, so that he can no longer go to the training ground? Ah, Feng nodded. Feng Ling can't bear to do that. Otherwise, he would have been gone long ago. He's only 17 years old. After all, he's still a child. Li Nanheng said lightly. He's not young anymore. Ah Feng recalled that Feng Ling had been very good at restraining her personality since she was 13 years old. She had never found any excuses to take any measures because of her young age. In contrast, 17 years old was indeed not young, but she was still so immature. Chapter 12:21. Li Nanheng went to the back and knew that Feng Ling was talking to Verum in the temporary lounge behind the spectator room. He wanted to knock on the door and enter, but then he remembered that Feng Ling was the main drill master of Team 1. Since he had handed this responsibility to her, he couldn't interfere with her decisions. As long as she didn't speak, she didn't need anyone's help for the time being. Li Nanheng leaned against the wall at the door of the lounge and casually lit a cigarette, only to hear the conversation inside. He glanced at the time. There were still 4 minutes left before the next round. Verum, what do you want? Feng Ling looked at Verum, who was still arrogant after being called in, and asked indifferently. Verum put his hands in the pockets of his black uniform and whispered, What do you mean, what do I want? Although my performance was average, and I pulled down the score of the team, there were a few other people in Team 2 who dragged me down. This can only be said to be a problem of the drill master strength. Even if I lose in the end, it has nothing to do with me. Feng Ling looked at him expressionlessly. Is this what you want after working hard in the base for an entire month? Verum paused and then glanced at her coldly. Even if I win in the end, only 10 of the 20 people can stay. You have to decide the 10 spots yourself. Will you keep me? Since I'm going to leave sooner or later, why should I work for others? If I lose, everyone will leave together. No one can stay. You want to stay? Of course.
All right.
Feng Ling nodded. As long as you perform as usual in the assessment, I'll keep you. Verum was startled. Although he was biased and unhappy with Feng Ling, he knew that she was a trustworthy and principled person. As long as she could say it, she could do it. It wasn't as simple as lying to him. Feng Ling continued. I'll explain it to Ah Feng and the others later. I can speak to the base hall. Such a simple matter is easy to resolve. If you want to stay, I can help you. She glanced at the time again. So, how do you want to play the next 6 rounds? Verum couldn't react. He felt that Feng Ling didn't say such a compromise because she was threatened, but he couldn't find any other reason. Let me ask you, since you want to stay, do you want to come up with a convincing result so that you can have a stable position in the base in the future? After all, people want to see your strength, not the quota that you won inexplicably. Feng Ling's expression remained indifferent, and there was not the slightest anger or impatience in her tone. She continued to speak calmly. But what I want to say is that you haven't personally experienced any actual combat mission. You haven't seen any of your brothers die tragically by your side. Do you know what the most solemn place in front of the base hall is? They were all the name tags of the base brothers who died in battle. Did you think that 11 base had nothing but reputation and money? This is the place closest to the gate of life and death. If you don't have enough strength, just taking a step out will mean death. Verum was speechless. Am I strict with you just because I don't want you to stay? In the end, you're the only one who benefits from physical training. When you're on a mission and you're under the enemy's gun or grenade, at least you have enough stamina and speed to avoid those fatal dangers.
You still have a chance to fight back.
If I rashly make you stay when I can't see your strength, what's the difference between that and the person in charge of the king of hell forcing a person to stay and wait for death? Verum. Feng Ling took a deep breath. Did you feel from the beginning that the base didn't value you at all when they sent a female drill master over? Although all of you patiently followed the training, your hearts were always unbalanced? You won't be satisfied with whether I treat you too hard or too lightly, just because I'm a woman? Verum explained hoarsely. That's not it, Feng Ling said indifferently. That's because you're not confident in yourself. You're too sensitive and extreme. If it weren't for the fact that I saw your strength and knew that you could do better, why would I call you out to do devil training alone? Do you think I'm targeting you, or am I responsible for your life in the base in the future? Verum froze for a moment, his hands clenched into fists. In my team, everyone is the same, but giving up is the most shameful. If you feel that you have no hope, you'll drag everyone down with you. But I think we can get full marks in the next 5 matches. We can win, and you can stay with your strength. Feng Ling looked at him. You have to know that your departure doesn't affect me much. If you're angry with me, it's your own business whether you stay or leave. Don't make a decision that you regret because you're young, and don't let yourself have a chance to be trampled on by the enemy because of a moment of laziness. Verum looked at Feng Ling and did not speak for a long time. Feng Ling glanced at the time. The competition was about to start. She fell silent and was about to walk out. Verum suddenly said, I'm sorry. Feng Ling paused and looked back at him. Li Nanheng put out the cigarette butt and turned to walk out. His back view disappeared at the end of the corridor. He was too nervous about his little woman. When everyone stepped on the blade and knew the pain, it was the most appropriate time to provoke them. Drillmaster Feng Ling didn't need to be comforted. She had been standing steadily. In the next few games, Verum was like a motor with a new battery, desperately charging forward. Wan Ke's strength could not be underestimated. The two of them cooperated very well, driving the other team members to win 4 full scores in a row. It was only in the last game that other team members were replaced, and in the end, they barely won 4 points. In total, Feng Ling's team won by 2 points. The gap was not big. It was said that the base would give extra points based on the performance of everyone on the training ground today. Although the number of spots was limited, all those who passed the test with their strength would be assessed again, which would allow them to win a few more spots with their strength. The base's actions pacified this batch of restless rookies and boosted their morale, as well as quelling all sorts of discussions. As for Feng Ling, at least it proved that her hard work this month was not in vain. The 20 people under her were all outstanding. As for the rest, it would be up to Chang Yuan to prove whether they could be even more outstanding. At this time, Ah Feng came out of the viewing room and suddenly said with a smile, Boss Li, after watching these rookies' wonderful competition, are you really not going to evaluate them personally? The dozens of rookies in the field looked at everyone in the field in surprise, and then looked around. Boss Li? Was the legendary boss of the base here? Where was he? Where was he? After coming to the base for so long, he hadn't seen Boss in person. Was he finally going to show up? A small transition. Love you guys, Mwab. Chapter 12:22. Boss Li. They were about to meet their idol. So excited. However, after looking for a long time, they did not see anyone. The group of people turned their heads to look in other directions. The 20 members of Team 1 were also looking around nervously, thinking that they actually had the chance to see Boss Li Nanheng, who was sitting on the steps next to Team 1, raised his eyebrows indifferently and glanced at Ah Feng, who was deliberately stirring up trouble. Feng Ling also stood rooted to the ground, but her eyes were calm as she looked at the group of people from Team 1. As she was standing far away, she could see the gazes of Li Nanheng, who had been sitting there calmly and casually at the same time. This day would come sooner or later. Today was indeed the most appropriate day. She just didn't know if the 20 idiots under her would be able to take this stimulation. After all, a few days ago, these people had cursed their boss behind his back. They secretly hated him for being too ruthless, too heavy-handed, and too cold. He didn't give them any face at all. Li Nanheng was still sitting there, as if he didn't want to steal the limelight from these newcomers today. Every few years, the base would have to change new blood. In the future, 11 base would only be stronger than the previous generation. From the Deputy Drill Master of Team 1 and Team 2. At this moment, Ah Feng turned his gaze to the man sitting on the stairs and said with a smile, Boss Li, you seem to be reluctant to part with your identity as a Deputy Drill Master, don't you? Why don't we continue to recruit a batch of newcomers for you to train after this batch of newcomers is over? That way, you won't have to hide your identity and be an assistant drill master. In order to prevent the two teams' newbies from being too unbalanced after their identities were exposed, Li Nanheng also took the time to appear a few times in Team 2. He was equivalent to the deputy drill master of the two teams. Before Ah Feng finished speaking, the eyes of the two teams of rookies instantly turned to the man sitting in the most inconspicuous position. Almost in an instant, everyone looked in Nanhing's direction. Their eyes were filled with shock, disbelief, fear, and tears of regret for their poor performance in front of boss. There were also all kinds of strange gazes. Li Nanhing glanced at him coldly, got up, and walked down the stairs. When he was about to reach Ah Feng, he passed by Feng Ling intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, the seniors in the base knew that he did it on purpose, but the newbies didn't understand. When he passed by Feng Ling, he glanced at her, and Feng Ling also looked at him silently. Even if it was just a glance, he could see the joy and calmness in her heart at this moment. She was happy that her hard work paid off, and she finally won. She was calm because the newbies of the two teams were all fresh blood that the base needed most in the future. Winning or losing was just a game. She wouldn't be proud of such a narrow victory. I've been in the hospital for a few days and just came back today. I'm sitting quietly in the crowd. Can't you let me have a good rest? Li Nanheng glanced at him unkindly before taking the microphone from Ah Feng's hand. Ah Feng chuckled. It's just a matter of a few words. Boss, 1 word from you is worth 10 words from us. You're better at boosting morale than me. Boosting morale? Li Nanheng sneered, picked up the microphone, and said expressionlessly, just a few seconds ago, the person in charge of the base hall, Ah Feng, the second in command of 11 base, asked me to say a few words to boost morale. Morale? Do you have any? Ah Feng. Everyone. Although the results of today's assessment matches have come out, I don't want to comment on everyone's performance, nor do I want to recall those terrible assessment standards, especially the members of Team 2. They could have played a better advantage to fight, but they didn't even show 70% of their ability.
Why?
Do you think coming to 11 base is like playing house? Can you put on a formal uniform with just a few moves on this training ground? The whole field was silent. Including the drill masters and newcomers, there were nearly 100 people, but at this time, it was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Li Nanheng's eyes coldly swept across the group of newcomers of the two teams who were still shocked and didn't dare to move or make a sound. I haven't been in the base recently, and I haven't been supervising the training of the members of the two teams. What I can't believe is that I've been out for so many days and finally took the time to come back today, but I didn't see anyone make progress. Instead, they regressed. If I were the referee today, let alone the two teams, you wouldn't even have a place. Do you know why 11 base is called 11 base? X represents perfection in sociology, but it means unknown in numbers. I means impregnable, unbreakable, and indestructible. Impregnable is the purpose of the base. Every member of the base must have the ability to stand on his own. This place is not a place where a coward can easily gain a foothold. But even if everyone strives to become stronger, they have to bear the responsibility. They will face unknown dangers in a certain mission at any time and any place. If there is even the slightest mistake or weakness in hand speed, it will give the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of, and they will die a graveless death. Why did you enter 11 base? Just because people who go out from here can gain a foothold in the sphere of influence of the military and the police? Or is it because the title of 11 base makes you look good? You are superior to others wherever you go?
Or
you just want to find a place to stay for a few years? Where do you think this is? A university? An overcrowded kindergarten? Or do you think the reputation of 11 base is just a rumor that a group of hooligans can easily stand here and be fooled? I don't have any encouraging words. I only have one thing to say. Open your eyes and see clearly what is the difference between this land and the outside world. Don't wait until you pay with your life and blood before you regret it. Those who have the ability stay, and those who don't get out. The audience was still silent, but no one looked dissatisfied, including Ah Feng, who originally wanted Boss Li to support them. At this moment, he no longer had a joking expression and stood aside solemnly. Feng Ling stood quietly and listened. Li Nanheng never spoiled anyone. Even though he said that he had been paying attention to her when she first entered the base, even though she was thinner than others, he had never been soft-hearted to her. If she wanted to stay in the base and wanted to live, she had to become stronger so that the enemy would not have a chance to take advantage of her. What the base needed was brave new blood, not a few nameplates hanging in front of the base hall. What they needed were brothers who could fight bravely, not burdens who would die on the battlefield. Chapter 12:23. Those who have the ability to stay, and those who don't have the ability to scram. These words sounded simple, but they contained a strong deterrent and warning. Indeed, in order to establish a foothold in the base, in addition to the ability to fight, one also had to have the ability to withstand psychological pressure. Take Varum's method, for example. If Li Nanheng were to deal with this matter, he would have kicked him out of the base before he made any movements. He would not have given him any chance to struggle at all. Although it seemed ruthless, in a place like 11 base, the word 11 was the dividing line between life and death. No one would spoil anyone. Those who were too delicate, too cowardly, too emotional, and even dragged down the entire team's performance because of their personal reasons, had no chance of staying in the base. Li Nanheng did not say it clearly, but it could be considered as an invisible slap in the face for some newcomers. Li Nanheng did not say anything more and ended his words with the word scram. He threw the microphone back into Ah Feng's hand and turned to leave. As he left, he reached out and suddenly hugged Feng Ling. Not only did he leave, but he also took Feng Ling away. Feng Ling was about to break free, but the man had already hugged her in public. Right now, even if she jumped hundreds of meters away, she could not block the scene that had been seen by everyone. Originally, the matter between her and Li Nanheng had been spread by the newcomers. Now, wasn't he clearly telling the newcomers that she was his woman? She turned to look at him. Li Nanheng received her gaze, but did not let go. Ignoring the group of trash behind him, he brought her away from the training ground and casually held her hand. As he held it in his hand, he suddenly glanced at her. "Why is your hand so cold?"
You scared me.
Now that there was no one around, she could only give up and stop struggling. She only said, "I thought you really planned to cancel all the candidates for this assessment. After all, they've been training for so long. Their recent emotional outbursts probably have something to do with me. First of all, I'm a woman, and they didn't believe me from the beginning. Later, although they accepted me, I was in the hospital for a while and didn't come back for a few days, so they thought the matter was complicated. I've been thinking about Jin Wan and didn't have the mood to comfort them, so it led to some people's extreme emotions today. But in the end, they have already worked very hard. It's all my fault. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the candidates is really too serious. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the quota is really too serious." Seeing that the man only looked at her and did not speak, Feng Ling quickly grabbed his sleeve with her other hand. Before the next assessment, the training time that should end at 4:00 every day will be extended by 3 hours. After dinner, they will train from 6:30 to 9:30.
How about that?
As she spoke, she looked at him eagerly. No matter what, they are all people I brought up. I can slowly get used to their temperament and character. Give them another chance, and leave the quota for them. Seeing that the little woman's eyes gradually softened, Li Nanheng's eyes gradually smiled. "Are you begging me?" Seeing him smile, Feng Ling knew that he was only smiling at her. He was probably still not satisfied with the group of newcomers. She also knew where those people were wrong and what they were sure about, but after getting along with them for a month, she understood their strengths and weaknesses very well. She believed that before the next assessment, she would definitely be able to make them change all these. She still held his sleeve.
Can you?
"Is this how you beg people?" Li Nanheng glanced at the way she was holding his sleeve. If he didn't let go, she wouldn't let him go. Feng Ling paused. She wanted to say that he was the one who refused to let her go, but it wasn't good to argue with him about this matter. She only said, "I think that although they are in the wrong, at least each of them has great potential. If I recruit a new batch of newcomers, they will also be young and energetic. They will also have to start over. It's better to gradually get used to the people I'm already familiar with. Since you've given the position of the drill master for the newcomers to me, you have to give me this opportunity. Also, believe me, I will definitely keep these 20 people. Li Nanheng curved his lips. Kiss me first? Feng Ling. Why are you still kissing me at this time? Mr. Mo is still lying in the hospital, and the newcomers have just finished their assessment. The fate of the two teams is in your hands. Why are you still kissing me? Li Nanheng coldly sneered. As long as Mo Jingshan doesn't wake up, you will accompany Ji Wan in melancholy?
What?
Don't you want to live your own life? Feng Ling, there's one more thing you said wrong. The fate of the newcomers is in their own hands. I can't stand in front of them again and again when they go out on missions. They don't have 9 lives. Whether they can stand firm in the base depends on their own ability. You can protect them for a while, but you can't protect them for a lifetime. Even if you can't protect them for a lifetime, you have to give them a chance. All right, I'll give them a chance. Li Nanheng leaned his face closer. I'll give it to them after a kiss. Li Nanheng raised his brows in this posture, and his expression clearly had a hint of success, as though saying that he was so shameless. It was not the first day she had met him. In fact, since Mr. Mo's accident, Feng Ling had not seen him for many days. For the person she liked, Feng Ling would also break many rules. For example, she would never show affection in front of others, but just now, Li Nanheng directly held her waist and left in public. Even if she didn't show off, she was still showing off. For example, although there were no newcomers around, some of the seniors in the base would occasionally pass by. It was true that he missed her, but now he insisted on kissing her at this time. This man was really shameless. Feng Ling clenched her right hand into a fist. After struggling for a few seconds, she quickly turned her head and kissed him on the cheek. It was less than a second. It couldn't be called a kiss at all. In fact, it was just a kiss on his face. Then she quickly took a step back, raised the hand that the man had just let go of, and put it on her mouth. Her neck was red, because a few familiar brothers from the base hall passed by just now. Although they stiffened their heads and did not turn their heads, the more they did not dare to turn their heads, the more it meant that they had seen it just now. Li Nanheng thought about it. You're the only one who begs so insincerely. If it were anyone else, I wouldn't agree. From his words, Feng Ling heard a glimmer of hope for those newcomers and quickly nodded. Thank you, boss. Li Nanheng was extremely evil and said, Can't you change big to big? Chapter 12:24. Feng Ling didn't understand what he meant at first, but after a few seconds, she understood what he meant. She said in a muffled voice, I'm not married to you. It's not appropriate to call you that. Li Nanheng sneered. You really refuse to give up until all hope is gone. But even if Li Nanheng wanted to tell her the fact that Feng Ling had married him 3 years ago, the untimely cry in her stomach interrupted his plan to immediately acknowledge her as his wife. After all, she had to eat. How long has it been since you last ate? Not long. Maybe it's noon? Or maybe I was so busy in the morning that I forgot. In fact, Feng Ling only ate once yesterday morning and hadn't eaten much since then. She didn't have much appetite, and because of her menstrual period, she was not feeling well. She was too busy with the assessment today, so she didn't want to eat anything at all. However, she didn't expect such an embarrassing thing to happen to her. She was talking to Li Nanheng, but her stomach actually made a sound at this moment. The newcomers had come out one by one, especially the people of Team 2. When they came out and saw that Boss Li and Drill Master Feng Ling were still outside, they all looked embarrassed and scared. They couldn't wait to take a detour, fearing that Boss Li, who had been secretly scolded by them many times a few days ago, would be unhappy and punish them. Although Li Nanheng wanted to single out a few boys to teach them a lesson, he was worried that Feng Ling was not in a good state during her menstrual period and that she hadn't eaten. So he greeted the drill master of Team 2 and asked the newcomers of the 2 teams to go out for a meal. The newcomers of the 2 teams were worried that they wouldn't even be qualified to mingle in front of Boss in the future. When they came out, they were all dejected. When they suddenly heard that Boss Li was treating them to a meal, They didn't know whether it was to drive them away or the base plan to give them another chance. They were all extremely nervous, but they didn't want to miss the opportunity to eat with their idol, so they all agreed. What was even more unexpected was that Bosley, who had just told them to scram expressionlessly on the training ground today, would actually treat them to hot pot. The weather was so cold, but the legendary iron-faced Yama Bosley was so warm. Li Nanheng sent someone out of the base to book a place. The sky had just turned dark, and the base sent more than a dozen cars to send the newcomers to the place for dinner. Of course, although Bosley was treating, he definitely wouldn't sit at the same table as them. However, this was the United States after all. It wasn't easy to find such a large, luxurious, and delicious hot pot restaurant. Furthermore, it was Boss's invitation. Even if they couldn't sit at Boss's table, everyone felt honored. Li Nanheng's table included Feng Ling, Ah Feng, and the others, as well as several old people in the base hall, including the sniper team, Han Jin, Xiao Su, and the others. They were all acquaintances. Because they were too familiar with each other, Feng Ling was much more at ease. She didn't want to be poked by the curious gazes of the newcomers again and again. Not long after, the waiter of the hot pot city brought in all the ingredients needed for these large tables. Tam shouted excitedly and pushed Kay at the same time. Brother, I never thought that one day Bosley would treat me to a meal, and it's even hot pot. Oh my god. Boss, how did you know that we've been craving hot pot recently? It's really hard to find something that tastes good in Los Angeles. I don't know. Li Nanheng brought over 2 plates of Feng Ling's favorite food and placed them in front of her. I only know that Feng Ling likes to eat it. Tam laughed shamelessly. Whatever, as long as I have something to eat. The weather is so cold now. Eating hot pot is a perfect match. Feng Ling, in the future, you have to order more delicious food in front of Boss. This way, we might have a chance to have a few meals with him. Have you ordered beef? Come. Bring me 2 more plates of beef. There's one next to it. Han Jin glanced at him. Tam turned to see 2 plates on the table and immediately put the meat into the hot pot with a smile. Li Nanheng took the fruit that Feng Ling usually liked to eat and placed it in front of her. The low-ingredient hot pot I brought you last time is from this chain store near the hotel over there. I've asked around. The taste of several chain stores is the same. There's no difference. It's also very close to the base. If you still want to eat in the future, I can bring you here often. Feng Ling picked up a red cherry tomato from the plate next to her and put it in her mouth. The sour and sweet taste made her feel comfortable. She then took the initiative to put the vegetables in front of her into the hot pot, picked up an orange, peeled it, and very naturally brought the orange to the man's mouth. Li Nanheng, who had always hated eating oranges. He looked at the woman's white fingers and the orange piece that was brought to his mouth. Under the gaze of everyone at the table, he opened his mouth and ate it. Xiao Su, Han Jin, and Ah Feng, who knew Li Nanheng's habits very well. F***ck, did they see wrongly? Bosley actually ate an orange? He didn't vomit? He actually swallowed it. Eat it yourself. Li Nanheng, who had been fed 3 mouthfuls in a row, could not hold on any longer. Although he would most likely be able to drink poison, even if Feng Ling fed him poison, the power of this orange was too strong. He really could not take it anymore. He pressed down her hand. Eat what you like first. Then, the man fed another cherry tomato into her mouth, successfully stopping her from raising her hand to feed him. In fact, Feng Ling was actually because the fate of so many newcomers was still in his hands. If Bosley was unhappy and kicked them all out of the base, what could she do? Therefore, even though she was embarrassed, she still subconsciously wanted to do something. However, she was not good at pleasing others, so she did not even care what fruit she picked up. She only felt that orange pieces were easier to feed. When she realized what she had fed him, she turned her eyes abruptly and met the man's smiling gaze. I say, the two of them were feeding each other. The entire table was stuffed with dog food. Ah Feng said, "Restrain yourself. Can't you restrain yourself a little? There are so many people here. They are all waiting to eat hot pot, but in the end, they were fed by your dog food first. Are you going to let them eat?" This is not the base. I'm dating my own woman. It's not like we're at the entrance of the base hall. Are you going to interfere? Li Nanheng glanced at him. You've been in the Li family for so long. Have you really not learned the slightest ability to read people's expressions? Ah Feng. He knew that he would bear a grudge against him for affecting Boss Li's love life. Ah Feng's twitching expression and the expressions of the others at the table who pretended not to see or hear clearly did not affect Li Nanheng's desire to fall in love with his little wife. Because of Ah Feng's words, Feng Ling felt that she should restrain herself. She was about to stand up and change seats when the man stretched out his long arm and placed it on the back of her chair. His voice was light, but had an irresistible deterrent force. Sit down. Begging for monthly votes. Chapter 12:25. Feng Ling sat down directly. Seeing that Feng Ling was so obedient to Boss Li, everyone at the table couldn't help sighing. Little Feng Ling, you are no longer the Feng Ling who appears to be obedient but doesn't take Boss seriously in your heart, Han Jin said, and shook his head. No, I used to be obedient, Feng Ling said. Yes, I can prove it. Our Feng Ling has always been absolutely obedient in the base. She has never been disloyal. She is very obedient. Kay shouted with the smell of alcohol in his mouth. Tisk everywhere. Han Jin squinted at him and then looked at Feng Ling, saying, The past is the past, and now is the present. Don't you know who the man beside you was before, and who the man beside you is now? Feng Ling said, He used to be boss. What about now? Xiao Su answered with a smirk. Now he is also old. Feng Ling didn't finish her sentence, and Li Nanheng next to her said lightly, Now he is my husband.
Puff.
Kay almost spat out the mouthful of wine he had just drunk. He quickly turned his head and coughed several times in a row. His face turned red, and when he saw Feng Ling's face was also red, he immediately grinned. Yes. Ignoring the gazes of the others, Li Nanheng knew that Feng Ling was thin-skinned when it came to this kind of thing. She couldn't express what she thought or said, so he didn't say more. After teasing her, he stopped talking about this and began to talk about other things. Then Li Nanheng took Feng Ling, avoided the others, and took her to a relatively secluded corridor behind the hot pot restaurant. The two of them didn't spend much time together in the base. She finally returned to the base after so many years, but in the past month or so since she came back, she spent most of her time with the newcomers. Besides, she had been accompanying Jin Wan in the hospital for the past few days, and the two of them only really got along with each other for 2 short days last weekend. After that, there were so many big and small things to deal with, so they didn't have time to spend together. There wasn't much time left for each other. Even if they were in the same place, the time where they could only occasionally pass each other or exchange a few words was far from enough for people who had finally gotten to know each other. Li Nanheng wanted to have some quiet space with Feng Ling to talk to her, to make her happy, to make her feel more relaxed and happy, to temporarily forget the burden of the youth training team, and to temporarily forget about Jin Wan. Apart from the people in the base, she rarely interacted with anyone else. She had very few friends, but Jin Wan was one of them. He could understand her concern, but seeing that she didn't smile for the past few days, although he could understand, he still hoped that she could relax. Ms. Wanzhou took Jin Wan back to the Xiao family in Los Angeles. They will take good care of her. Don't worry about the hospital anymore. They will inform us if anything happens. If you miss Jin Wan, you can go see her when it's convenient, Li Nanheng said as he brought her to the window at the end of the corridor. The temperature in this hot pot city was a little hot, but there was a little cool wind by the window, making people feel that the air temperature was moderate and very comfortable. Feng Ling nodded. Seeing that she was so obedient, Li Nanheng vaguely heard what she said to the newcomer outside the door today. Although she was just a woman, her voice was clear and clean, but each word was sonorous and powerful. No matter how cold and distant she was in front of others, no matter how serious she was in front of the newcomers, in front of him, she had already broken through her previous caution and restraint. She was more and more used to softening her temper in front of him. She was so warm and gentle that it made him want to hold her in his arms and rub her hard into his body. Li Nanheng raised his hand and gently rubbed her head. I know that after returning to the base from the hospital, you've been under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, your ability to adjust yourself has never disappointed me. Those newcomers have been temporarily rejected by me, but I believe that one day they will gradually grow in my hands and become a batch of members that I recognize. Be patient. I'll be patient too. Fengling knew that Li Nanheng didn't completely fall out with her at the assessment site today because he had given her and Ah Feng enough face, but what he said later showed that he was really dissatisfied. But she never expected that Li Nanheng would compromise to this extent because of her. Boss Li, who had always been in the base and would never spoil anyone, actually patiently waited for her to grow up with the newcomers. It would be a lie to say that she was not touched. Fengling didn't know what to say, but instinctively reached out to hold his waist, leaned into his arms, and gave him a real hug. This was the first time that the little woman had taken the initiative to throw herself into his arms with such a soft expression. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction, hugged her firmly, lowered his head, and kissed her on the face. As if kissing was not enough, he lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. Fengling was afraid that any passing waiter or people from the base would see it, so she subconsciously dodged. Before she could dodge, her chin was pinched by the man and kissed her. Li Yu. Fengling's voice paused because of his kiss, and she looked at him. Li Nanheng originally only wanted to kiss her, but because she was staring at him at such a close distance, he took a deep breath and pinched her chin. At the same time, when he thought of the things she was holding in the bathroom today, the veins on his forehead throbbed. The heavens seemed to be purposely going against him. It wasn't easy for him to return to the base. It wasn't easy for him to find time to be affectionate with his little wife, but her period came at the right time. Fengling didn't know what the man was thinking. She just couldn't imagine that as a drill master of the newcomers, she had to establish her prestige in front of the newcomers again. She had to recover from her bad state and be a good figure in front of the newcomers, but now she was kissing here. If a few newcomers passed by her face, would she still want it? Feeling Fengling's grip on his waist tightened, she was obviously nervous. Li Nanheng kissed and carried her to a corner. He was about to continue kissing her hard when his phone suddenly rang. He impatiently took out his phone and glanced at it, then strangely glanced at the many tables over there and picked up the phone. Speak. Xiao Su chuckled on the phone. Boss, Ah Feng said that it's rare for us to come out today, so we should have a good night. He plans to treat everyone to a hot spring in the nearby hot spring hotel before going back. Let's relax together. Chapter 12:26. Ah Feng realized that he had offended Boss Li too much recently and had a rare desire to live. He wanted to take this opportunity to create some ambiguous space for Boss and Fengling. Perhaps this way, Boss's anger would dissipate. Li Nanheng, who instantly understood his meaning, snorted coldly. He's considerate. Unfortunately, not to mention soaking in the hot spring, even if he stripped Fengling clean and stuffed her into his arms, he still couldn't sleep with her. The most hateful thing in the world was a woman's menstruation. It was neither too early nor too late. It always came at the right time. After hanging up the phone, Li Nanheng grabbed Fengling with one hand, continued to hold her by his side, and walked out. Where are we going? Fengling asked. Someone specially invited us to soak in the hot spring in order to atone for his sins. Hot spring? I've never soaked in it. Li Nanheng turned to see the ignorant curiosity in Fengling's eyes, gritted his teeth, and hated her menstruation again. After eating hot pot, they went to soak in the hot spring. This kind of treatment could be said to be rare in the base. This group of newcomers who came out to eat were really lucky. The point was that although these newcomers had been in the base for a month, they still didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Apart from knowing that the deputy drill master, oh no, Boss Li was not easy to provoke and they shouldn't easily approach and offend him, this group of newcomers would still gather together from time to time to quietly discuss various new things. When they first entered the hot spring hotel, a group of people still bowed in front of Li Nanheng and said that Boss was good. In the past, they didn't recognize Mount Tai as they had eyes but were all ignored by Li Nanheng, so they could only gather aside and didn't dare to say anything. But when they changed into their swimming trunks and went to the hot spring pool on the first floor of the hotel that was built like a mountain rock wall, they formed groups of 3 to 5 and went into the small pools to whisper to each other. When Hanjin and the others passed by the entrance of some small pools, they could still hear those people talking about the fact that Boss Lee was actually the deputy drill master, and the deputy drill master was actually Boss Lee. They still hadn't figured it out yet. They all said that it was fortunate that they didn't directly confront the deputy drill master, otherwise they would really die today. Feng Ling was the last to enter. As she was a woman, she went to the women's changing room by herself. Then, because of her period, she specially bought a pair of waterproof shorts from the staff of the hot spring hotel. Then, she put on the swimsuit she bought with the shorts she had just bought. The swimsuit she bought was a slightly more conservative style. After all, there were so many men in the base. If she went into the hot spring wearing all kinds of bikinis like the others in this locker room, Li Nanheng would probably be the first to pull her out with a green face. After changing, Feng Ling entered the hot spring. However, this place was really built like a cave. There were all kinds of small ponds everywhere. There were all kinds of medicinal ponds, rose ponds, and everything. Furthermore, there were small signs engraved on the stone walls outside each small pond, stating the temperature and effect of the water in each small pond. She walked all the way in, listening to the laughter and noise in each small pool. When she walked near a medicinal bath, she suddenly heard someone talking. "Hey, did you see Boss Lee when he was changing in the men's locker room just now?" "No, Boss Lee's locker room shouldn't be with us. The men's locker rooms are all connected. Even the richest man in the world has to walk in from there." Ah Feng and the others were all there just now. Boss Lee must be there too, but we just didn't meet him. So, what if we meet him? Can we go up and suck up to him? I don't fucking dare. A few days ago, weren't those people in our team always talking about the deputy drill master in private? Damn it, I'm scared when I think about it. I knew this deputy drill master's aura was different. Not to mention the main drill master. Even the second in command of the base like Ah Feng was respectful to him. At that time, we just didn't dare to think about it. Otherwise, if the second in command of the base treated him so carefully, who else could it be? We should have known it was Boss Lee, TSK. Hey, by the way, Drillmaster Feng Ling and Boss Lee, is there a need to say it? Anyone who is not blind can see that they are obviously a couple. I really didn't expect that although Drillmaster Feng Ling is indeed quite beautiful, she is usually so serious and doesn't have any femininity. I thought a woman like her would be more attractive to those little fangirls. Boss Lee is tall and masculine. Don't you usually like long-haired Lolitas? Lolita my foot. I think Drillmaster Feng is more interesting. At least, she's not pretentious. She's much more charming than those little girls who speak with their throats pinched all day and scream when their hands are scratched. She heard so many words just by passing by. Feng Ling thought that the existence of Li Nanheng really destroyed her cold image. If she wanted to be more dignified in the future, she would have to think of other ways. She was about to continue walking forward when she suddenly heard another sentence. Boss Lee's nose is so straight and his figure is so strong. I guess the size of his lower body is not small, haha. It's a pity that I didn't see it in the locker room just now. Otherwise, I can really go and secretly watch it. Hearing this, Feng Ling, who was already prepared to leave, decisively and quickly left, trying to walk as far away as possible. The area of this hot spring room was very large, and it was rugged. She had to walk around, so she couldn't see which pools were in front of her. After walking for a while, Feng Lin seemed to be lost. She looked around and could only find a place where she couldn't hear them. Anyway, it was not convenient for a woman to soak in the same pool as others, so she might as well find an empty pool and soak in it by herself. She had just walked to a quiet place on the other side and looked inside. Seeing that there was no one in the pool, she was about to walk in when suddenly a figure jumped up behind her. She turned her eyes vigilantly, but before she could see who it was, she was suddenly pushed against the smooth stone wall. The man lowered his head and was about to kiss her, but she looked at the face in front of her with a shocked expression. After confirming that the person in front of her was Li Nanheng, her tense body slowly relaxed. Feeling her tension, Li Nanheng didn't kiss her. Looking at her wide-eyed expression, he smiled and pinched her cheek. Are you scared? Who do you think it is? Who dares to touch me like this? It was because she knew that others didn't have the guts, so even though she subconsciously wanted to kick his family jewels, she still held back. Chapter 12:27. Even though she did not soak in the hot spring, the temperature of this place was still hot. The surroundings were surrounded by white mist, which made the man's action of pressing her against the stone wall appear much more intimate. Feng Ling shifted her eyes to look at the empty pool inside. What pool is this? Li Nanheng glanced at the stone carvings outside and said, It's an ordinary spring pool. In fact, most of these so-called hot springs are the same. Unless it's a hotel opened at the location of the spring, it's basically just a gimmick. They put all kinds of things in the water and put all kinds of colors and smells in it. It's not as clean as this ordinary spring pool. Feng Ling didn't quite understand, but when she heard that this pool was clean and saw that there was indeed a location connected to the spring, she guessed that it was because this place was closest to the mountain range and was too close to it. Furthermore, no one would specially come to soak in an ordinary hot spring pool. No wonder there was no one here. She nodded, gently pushed him away, and turned to walk in. She stood by the pool and looked down. Then she stretched out her feet and gently touched the water. The temperature was a little hot, but it was not hot. The water here was about 42 degrees. Li Nanheng saw the temperature outside and walked over. Seeing that she was standing by the side to test the water, he did not say anything. He untied the bath towel on his body and entered the water. The moment the man undid his towel and entered the water, wearing only his black swimming trunks, Feng Ling's gaze faltered on his body. Nanheng did not show the slightest bit of fear. It was clear that it was rare for her to have a chance to admire his perfect figure. He even gave her a devilish smile. Feng Ling. What was he smiling at? Crazy. Earlier, she wanted to ask if the water was so hot. Didn't he feel hot just sitting in it? She also turned back to look at the temperature. After confirming that it was 42 degrees, she leaned over to Li Nanheng and touched the temperature of the water beside him. She then looked at him and asked, Is it hot? It's not hot. Li Nanheng gave her an affirmative answer. She looked at his body in the water and felt that it was really comfortable to soak in. Just as she was hesitating about which direction to enter the water, the man's arm suddenly reached out in her direction and grabbed her waist. He pulled her down along with the bath towel on her. With a plop, Feng Ling fell into the water. She hurriedly jumped out of the water, raised her hand to wipe the water, and said angrily in the white mist, Li Nanheng, what are you doing, cough? The man saw her struggling in the water with a flushed face. He just wanted to tease her, but in the end, he couldn't help but grab her. He stepped forward and hugged the woman who was still struggling in the water. He bent down and kissed her hard on the lips. Feng Ling looked at his face and eyes and felt as though she was about to be sucked in by his eyes. She was so angry that she wanted to kick him, but in the end, she softened in the hot water. His feelings were like a raging flame that had been doused with boiling oil. Even water couldn't extinguish it. The heat waves surged and turned everything into ashes. Under the kiss, their lips and tongues intertwined. The two of them were trying their best to absorb each other's breath, but it was as though there was a curtain separating them. They only felt that it was not enough, not enough. Li Nanheng helped Feng Ling up from the spring. Only then did she notice that when she stood up, the spring water did not pass her ribs. He pushed her against the side of the wet and hard spring. As he kissed her passionately and passionately, he tore the bath towel on her body. Earlier, she was also wrapped in a bath towel outside her swimsuit. Before she was ready to enter the water, she was suddenly pulled down by him. The bath towel on her body was wet and wrapped around her body. This was indeed the place connected to the largest spring in the hotel. Unlike the other hot pools with all kinds of aromatherapy items, the water in the spring was clean and hot. The temperature was slightly hot, but it was the healthiest and most comfortable temperature. Occasionally, the water that came out of the spring was slightly turbulent, splashing on the stone wall next to it, stirring up little splashes. The only sound that could be heard was the gurgling of the spring, and nothing else could be heard. Feng Ling was pressed against the stone wall by the spring and kissed. Her bathrobe had long been thrown away. Although the newly bought swimsuit was very conservative, it still revealed a large portion of her back. The man saw that the material of her chest was connected and directly rubbed her smooth and tender snow-white back. Don't. To be kissed to such an extent in this hot spring hotel where other people might pass by at any time, a certain sense of shame made Feng Ling even more sensitive. She panted under Li Nanheng's comfort. Suddenly, she felt the man lower his head and bite the strap of her swimsuit on her shoulder. She immediately called out softly to stop him, but before she could do so, the man had already lowered his head even more and kissed her entire body, instantly tensed up, and even her toes that were submerged under the water curled up. Her face, which she usually pretended to be dignified in front of the newcomers, gradually became confused because of this tide of passion. Her expression of struggling between indulgence and rationality was sexy enough to drive people crazy. Li Nanheng. Her voice was hoarse. Because of the man's kiss, her eyes were half open, and she could not help but gasp. "What do you call me?" The man took the time to raise his head and kiss her lips comfortingly. He asked in a low, threatening voice. "Feng Ling, call me hubby." The water mist filled the air, covering everything. Seeing that she had been maintaining her rationality and refusing to call him, Li Nanheng turned her back. She could instantly feel Li Nanheng pressing against her underwater. Her face was pressed against the stone wall. It was a little cold, but her body was too hot in the hot spring. This made the man's body even more hot. She trembled because of this overflowing tide of passion, and her eyes were a little unfocused. All of a sudden, the man pushed against her from behind. Even though there was a layer of her swimsuit and waterproof shorts inside, she was caught off guard. She could not help but gasp. "Ah, don't." The man behind her paused. He seemed to be stimulated by her suddenly low, hoarse, and somewhat soft voice. He held her waist tightly and moved hard under the water. It was through the clothes. It was through the clothes. Even so, Feng Ling was so stimulated that she was about to burst into tears. The person who was in the water with him was Feng Ling. This matter had always been difficult for Li Nanheng to endure. He leaned over her. From the surface of the water, he only caused a splash, but under the hot spring, his movements were threatening. Feng Ling was in a daze when she heard the man ask, "What did you call me?" "Bo, boss, en?" "Bo, you?" The woman pressed against the stone wall's voice was moist and hoarse. Her eyes were filled with sparks, and her eyes were red. Chapter 12:28. You, hubby. Her voice was so hoarse that it was almost inaudible, but it caused Li Nanheng's eyes to darken. The man's movements caused the water to splash. The warmth of the hot spring combined with a touch of Feng Ling's swimsuit made the man understand that he was about to lose his mind. He took a deep breath. Before he could do anything crazy, he abruptly turned Feng Ling over and pressed his chest against hers. The hardness and softness collided. The water vapor rising from the direction of the spring blurred their eyes, and the constant temperature was still very hot water splashed on their faces. Feng Ling was brought away by the true emotions and feelings in her heart. Looking at her, Li Nanheng bent down and kissed her fiercely. He kissed her urgently and kissed her lips hungrily. He kissed her with almost violent strength. His other hand gradually moved down, stroked her waist, and held it. Feng Ling had been in the base for a long time, and no one had really come into close contact with her. He didn't know that under her tough appearance, her entire body was actually soft, and her waist was also slender. He pressed her harder into his arms. Feng Ling inexplicably felt that the man's hand on her waist was so ambiguous that it was stimulating. She was also stimulated to the point that she half closed her eyes and raised her neck to moan softly. "I am now." She wanted to say that she was on her period, and it was inconvenient. However, she only had time to say 3 words before her voice was sealed between Li Nanheng's lips and teeth. Li Nanheng hurriedly hugged her even tighter, rubbing against her clothes and rubbing his hands against her body, stimulating her. He tightly hugged the little woman he had loved for many years and felt Feng Ling trembling slightly in his arms. Her trembling made him feel satisfied, and it made him crazy and infatuated. After the kiss, their lips and teeth were still pressed against each other. In this hot spring, Feng Ling almost lost herself in such an uncontrollable kiss. She subconsciously opened her eyes and looked down at the man's naked chest. She didn't know when her hand had started to caress his chest. With just a glance, her scalp went numb, and she quickly moved her hand away. However, just as her hand was about to leave his body, Li Nanheng suddenly grabbed her wrist and pressed her hand down into the water. Feng Ling's eyes, which had turned slightly red from the kiss, were now moistened by the surrounding mist. She struggled gently, but did not struggle too hard. The man pressed her hand down and bent down to kiss her ear. His breathing had yet to calm down. He said seductively and huskily, "I know it's not convenient for you right now, but I can't get out of the water like this. Help me." Feng Ling's hand was held so tightly by him. In the warm fog, Feng Ling's heart trembled because of the man's low and hoarse voice. She obediently pressed her hand against his. Just as they were about to explode, Li Nanheng suddenly carried Feng Ling out of the water to prevent her from dirtying the water in the spring. At the same time, he pressed her heavily into a hidden crack in the stone wall. He murmured, "If we don't quickly become husband and wife, I'm afraid I won't be able to take it." Then he couldn't help but hold her cheeks, which were burning red from his continuous movements, and kiss her hard. By the side, the water in the spring was gurgling, and the water in the spring gradually flowed faster. The white steam and the sound of the water covered this small space very well. Even if they were not in the water, they were not worried that someone would see anything when passing by, because the fog was really too thick. Feng Ling couldn't breathe from Li Nanheng's kiss. Her lips were slightly swollen. She took a chance to catch her breath and then was kissed hard again. She was a little distracted, and her eyes were unfocused. For a moment, she didn't understand what he meant by the name of husband and wife. In the end, Li Nanheng abruptly bit the tender skin between her neck and shoulder. At the same time, he let out a long, muffled groan. A moment later, he hugged her, buried his face in her neck, and pressed against her neck, panting for a long time. In the end, he gently and lovingly kissed her neck, shoulder, chin, mouth, nose, and finally back to her lips. He kissed her again and again as though he was full of love. "Stop kissing me." Feng Ling's face was flushed and her hands were trembling. "If this goes on, how am I going to accompany them for shooting practice tomorrow? I can't even pick up the gun." Hearing Feng Ling's low protest, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. It was obviously not enough to relieve the gap that they couldn't be together these days. He kissed her cheek and panted lowly, "Baby, I love you." She knew that he really loved her, but when he said the word love so straightforwardly, Feng Ling subconsciously pressed her head against the man's shoulder and was too embarrassed to look at him. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction and hugged her tightly. Then he lowered his head to look at the mess he had made on her swimsuit. His eyes darkened, and his voice was muffled. "There's a single bathroom at the back. Let's go take a shower together?" And, although this man tried his best to restrain himself and did not do anything else, Feng Ling was inevitably bullied for a while. He hugged and kissed her. Under the shower full of hot water, she couldn't even take a proper shower. In the end, she was kissed until she leaned against the wall. Li Nanheng took the shower down and washed her from head to toe. After washing, he hugged and continued to kiss, as though even if he couldn't do anything else, he wanted to kiss back all the emptiness he had felt these days. The other people in the hot spring room had long discovered that Boss Li and Feng Ling had disappeared, but they tacitly didn't ask a single word. Even the newcomers who were not very sensible could roughly guess what was going on. They could joke about anything, but they didn't dare to joke around this time. After all, if they really said anything wrong, their lives would be over. She tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb from his kisses. She was so embarrassed by his torture that she tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb. Don't kiss me." Fengling seemed to hear someone walking past the bathroom and quickly whispered. Li Nanheng kissed her on the lips again. He had seen her being tormented under him until she lost her soul. He had seen her cry until she couldn't control her body and her eyes were dazed. Thus, looking at her who was still somewhat sober, he couldn't restrain himself. He just wanted to hold her and become one with her soul and body. He wanted her to like everything about him. He wanted her to be comfortable. He wanted her to lose her soul only for him. Chapter 12:29. After Fengling returned to the base, she almost couldn't get up on time the next morning. She didn't fall asleep until midnight. Fortunately, she had set an alarm clock on her cell phone. Usually, she didn't need an alarm clock and could wake up on time according to her biological clock habits, but today, she still waited until the alarm clock rang before opening her eyes. The morning training passed peacefully. After lunch, she took the time to gather the people who had problems in the assessment field and talk to them for a while. From their performance and words, she roughly understood their feelings and thoughts. Of course, although the words Li Nanheng said in public sounded like he was belittling them, for these young and energetic children, this was the way to really arouse their fighting spirit. Today, none of these people admitted defeat, didn't want to be looked down upon, and didn't want to leave the base because of Boss Li's disapproval, so they were particularly energetic during the morning training. In the afternoon, a few uninvited guests suddenly came to the base. They were not uninvited guests, but not only Fengling, but also most of the members of the base were slightly flustered by their arrival. After all, the 4 elders of the Li family were never easy to deal with. Every time the 4 of them appeared in the base, everyone basically didn't have a good day. If it wasn't for this rule being rectified, they would have to scold them for something they didn't like, causing the entire base to panic. The key was that the person in charge of the base hall, Feng, happened to be one of these elders' men. Especially, Fengling, who had been driven out of the base by them, was back. Hearing that the 4 elders of the Li family had come, Feng sat in the base hall in a daze. Obviously, even Feng hadn't received any notice this time. Han Jin and Xiao Su frowned in an instant. Xiao Su, why is Elderly here? Han Jin thought of the scene before Fengling was driven out of the base by Elderly and also frowned. Should we let Fengling hide for a while? Feng didn't say anything but turned to look at Boss Li, who was sitting at the conference table in the base hall with a calm expression. Logically speaking, the appearance of the Li elders would definitely target Fengling, and Boss Li would definitely be the first to be unhappy, but now looking at Boss Li's calm expression, Feng felt that there might be a turn for the better. Xiao Su and Han Jin were still discussing worriedly, wondering if the 4 elders had heard the news that Fengling had returned, but they didn't think it was possible. Fengling had been back for more than a month. When the base made the decision to recall Fengling, they didn't intervene, and now they didn't say anything about this matter. Why did they suddenly come again, as soon as the newcomer assessment was over? Boss, what do you think? Feng asked. The silver lighter in Li Nanheng's hand was casually flipped twice in his palm. He did not answer. After hearing the news that Elderly had come, Fengling didn't seem to be affected, but her mood was somewhat depressed, especially when she thought of what had happened when she left. She thought of what the 4 elders had said and the so-called rules in the base. She instinctively felt that there should be a hard battle to fight, but this time, the situation was at least much better than last time. This time, everyone knew the ins and outs of the matter, including how she returned to the base, and Li Nanheng was also in the base now. If there was anything, they could talk to each other face to face. They wouldn't miss each other like in the past. Drillmaster Fengling, Elderly wants to see you. Fengling was still instructing the rookies on the training ground when someone suddenly called her from outside. She stood in place for a few seconds and looked back. Got it. What was going to come would come. Then let's face them one by one and solve them one by one. She raised her hand and tidied up the collar of her black uniform. She said a few words to the newcomers in the team and told them to practice by themselves. Then she turned and walked out without hesitation. When she walked in the direction of the base hall, as she expected, the people in Team 3, who didn't get along with her, were already waiting on the way. Seeing her walking over, they stood by the side and pretended to be talking about something, but when she passed by them, she heard their conversation. I knew she wouldn't stay in the base for long. Sooner or later, she would be kicked out. The elders definitely won't let her stay. They were the ones who drove her away. Now Boss Lee brought her back. Isn't this a slap in the face to the elders? Boss Lee is their only grandson. They won't say anything, but Feng Ling has nothing to do with the Lee family. They definitely want to get rid of her so as not to ruin the atmosphere and reputation of the base. Feng Ling heard these words when she passed by them. If it were a few years ago, she would have walked by silently and expressionlessly as if nothing had happened. At this moment, she stopped in her tracks and slowly turned her head around. She looked at them with a cold and indifferent gaze. Feeling her sharp gaze, the members of Team 3 abruptly turned to look at her.
They were slightly stunned.
They didn't expect that Feng Ling, who was used to being calm and silent, would look at them like this after hearing their deliberately mocking words. Obviously, she didn't intend to let it go so easily. One of the members of Team 3, who was particularly sturdy, was not afraid of her. After all, they were all veterans in the base. Who didn't know what was going on? What are you looking at? You're just a little girl. Don't listen to the men's conversation. Otherwise, you'll cover your face and run away when we talk about something that will make you feel ashamed. How embarrassing that would be. After saying that, the few of them stood there and laughed out loud. I've been in the base for so many years, and I have many brothers by my side. Why don't you know what will make me feel embarrassed? What are you talking about that can make me feel ashamed? Tell me. Feng Ling smiled lightly and walked toward them. Then she stood in front of them, took out her cell phone from her pocket, and clicked on the screen casually. Although they didn't see the screen, they heard the soft beep on her cell phone and knew that she was recording. Originally, they really wanted to say some dirty jokes or something strange to humiliate her, but they also knew that she was going to see old Master Lee soon. Even if the 4 elders of the Lee family didn't like her, if she dragged them into the water with a recording before she was kicked out, then it wouldn't be worth it. The people of Team 3 hesitated for a moment, but in the end, they didn't dare to speak. They just looked at her mockingly and scolded with a smile. There's nothing to say to a woman like you. It's a waste of time to talk too much. Elder Lee is already waiting for you. Hurry up and go. Chapter 1230. If it weren't for the fact that Elder Lee was waiting for her, Feng Ling would probably have taught these people a lesson. Anyway, the worst result was that she would be driven out of the base again. If she really wanted to leave, she didn't mind taking revenge on them and taking these members of Team 3 with her. She looked indifferently at their expressions, which showed that they didn't dare to speak carelessly. She curled her lips indifferently and suddenly swept her feet forward. 2 of them staggered back a step and almost fell. Then, they were astonished to see that she used the tip of her foot to easily pick up a balancing steel pole placed by their feet. With a light push of her leg, the long steel pole directly and steadily fell into her hand. Feng Ling simply turned her hand and swung the steel rod forward, almost hitting their heads. A gust of wind swept past their heads. Although it didn't touch them, it carried a hint of killing intent. This was Feng Ling's silent warning. The few of them didn't say anything, but their expressions were ugly as they looked at each other. If they really had to fight, they might not be able to defeat Feng Ling, who now had a weapon in her hand. There were many men in the base, and it was not uncommon for them to fight in private. However, as long as they didn't use guns on their own people and the situation was not serious, the higher-ups would turn a blind eye to it. After all, fighting was also a man's habit, just like how women were naturally used to gossiping, so they couldn't be bothered to deal with it. Feng Ling clearly knew how to not violate the rules of the base. Just the steel rod in her hand was enough to beat all of them down. Those people were sensible. They had always been dissatisfied with her, so they didn't want to cause trouble, so they simply stepped back and then turned to leave. As they walked, they said, "There's no need to waste time with a person who is about to leave." Let's go to the base hall to watch the fun. Feng Ling threw the steel rod in her hand forward expressionlessly, and it instantly landed about half a meter in front of those people. The lower part of the rod was directly inserted into the solid and flat soil on the ground, and it was so stable that it didn't even tremble. When they came back to themselves and looked back, Feng Ling had already turned and left. When she arrived at the base hall, she found that many familiar old members and important leaders of the base were there. She didn't look around but saw Grandfather Li Nanheng's grandfather, Li Junyan, sitting in the main seat in the middle of the base hall. He was the one who had personally driven her out of the base. Even though her relationship with Li Nanheng was stable, and even though he was Li Nanheng's grandfather, Feng Ling didn't look at him angrily, but when she walked in, she didn't show any expression. Li Junyan was still talking to Ah Feng. Ah Feng stood by the side and answered every question he asked. His attitude was quite respectful. When he saw Feng Ling, he stopped talking and turned to look at her. He looked at her up and down and said mildly, "You're here?" Although Li Nanheng was the boss of the base, Ah Feng was still Elder Li's man. Thus, Ah Feng treated Li Nanheng like a brother and a subordinate, but in front of Elder Li, he was clearly a respectful junior. Seeing Grandfather Li's indifferent attitude toward Feng Ling, the people in the base who were waiting to see Feng Ling make a fool of herself had already foreseen Feng Ling's ending. They guessed that she would still be driven out and wouldn't be spared any face. They thought that Elder Li must have come with anger. After all, the person who was driven out by them dared to come back now. He didn't take them seriously at all. Feng Ling walked to about 7 or 8 meters in front of Li Junyan and stopped. She answered calmly, "Elderly." The other 3 elders also sat by the side. They looked at her coldly and did not speak, but it was clear that they were not satisfied with her return. The people present couldn't tell what Li Junyan's attitude was, but looking at the expressions of the other 3 elders, they felt that this matter was almost certain. They wouldn't let Feng Ling stay. "And you've grown up. You're taller than 3 years ago, and you look much more mature than you did 3 years ago." Li Junyan looked at her. Although his expression did not change, he suddenly said this. "Everyone. That's not right." Shouldn't he angrily smash his walking stick and ask her how she had the nerve to come back? Feng Ling raised her eyes and scanned the 2 of them in the crowd. In the end, she found that Li Nanheng was not standing in the crowd. Instead, he was casually leaning against the railing at the corner of the stairs. He crossed his arms and looked in this direction. His eyes were calm. Seeing Li Nanheng's expression, Feng Ling retracted her gaze to look at Li Junyan. She saw that Grandfather Li had been staring at her, but this time it was no longer filled with disgust, distance, and rejection like when he had chased her away. Right now, in his eyes, he was sizing her up and carefully observing her. There was also an unknown emotion in his eyes. Feng Ling did not speak, and Li Junyan did not ask her to speak. He just looked at her and said, "I already know that you're an instructor for the newcomers in the base. How is it? Is the performance of those newcomers acceptable? Is there anything you need to worry about? If there are any who are too disobedient, just look for Han Jin to help you. After all, he led the elite team and Team 1 back then. He has some experience." Although Han Jin, who was suddenly called out, was dumbfounded, he still quickly said, "Yes, if Drill Master Feng Ling needs anything, I will do my best to help." Everyone. Did old Master Li change his ways? Even the other 3 elders looked confused. Didn't they accompany Big Brother here to get rid of this little girl? What was going on with Big Brother? The more he spoke, the more amiable he sounded. The more he spoke, the more it sounded like he was talking to his granddaughter-in-law. What was wrong with him? Feng Ling stood there for a long time before replying stiffly, "All right. This old man am probably getting old." Li Junyan ignored everyone's gazes and casually placed his hands on his walking stick. He said, "In the past, I've always been very concerned about the difference between men and women, but after I checked some information about you when you were out on missions, I found that although you're young and a girl, your actions are not inferior to those men in the base at all. I'm old. Don't bother about what I did back then. Now that you're back, just live a good life." Just as Feng Ling was standing there in a daze and did not know what to say, Li Junyan suddenly said, "If you have time, come to the Li family for a meal." Everyone. **CK. Did the sun rise from the west? Elderly, cough cough. In order to have a great-grandson as soon as possible, I'll put aside my face for the time being, including the face of my 3 brainless brothers. Hihiha, please give me a monthly vote. Chapter 1231. She never expected that things would develop to the point where Grandfather Li invited Feng Ling to the Li family for a meal. Feng Ling didn't know how to react. She looked at the elders in front of her and didn't know how to answer. She felt that this matter had something to do with Li Nanheng, but she remembered that Grandfather Li was a very stubborn old man who wasn't easily shaken. However, his current attitude was clearly not only shaken, but he had already accepted her. She was very curious about how Li Nanheng did it. However, it was not appropriate for her to look in his direction. She only looked at Grandfather Li cautiously. She saw that Li Junyan and the other 3 elders' expressions didn't seem to be the same. At least, Li Junyan was calm. He clearly knew what he was saying and doing, while the other 3 probably didn't know. Then this was even more awkward. She didn't speak, but Han Jin coughed by the side. Everyone present could tell that Grandfather Li had put down his 80-year-old face. Back then, he had chased her away in public. Now, he was apologizing to her in public. No matter what, she had to express her gratitude. Furthermore, the old man had already put down his attitude. If she kept remaining silent, it wouldn't be right. Feng Ling also knew that she shouldn't be silent. She deliberated for a few seconds before saying, "A few years ago, I was still young, and my way of doing things was too stiff and immature. When you rejected me, elderly, I didn't know how to prove myself in front of you. Now I came back so rashly, but elderly can forgive me. This is already a great forgiveness for me. It's really enough for me to stay in 11 base." As she spoke, she continued to look at Li Junyan. "Elderly, you're so magnanimous. You don't even care about your face in front of so many people. In your eyes, we're all children. The fact that you can apologize to a child is enough to show your magnanimity. I'm really satisfied now. Thank you, elderly, for accepting me." Feng Ling, who had never understood the ways of the world, had learned some tactful ways of speaking in the past 3 years. Her words were more or less in line with old Master Li's reputation. Although it was not particularly perfect, at least she had regained old Master Li's dignity. Neither of them had suffered any losses. Han Jin and the others were also very pleased to hear this, and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then they looked at Xiao Su next to him and secretly conveyed satisfaction to each other. Not bad. Feng Ling has really grown up. Li Junyan only gave her a chance to stay on account of the Feng family and Li Nanheng. After all, he had seen this little girl's backbone.
How old was she at that time?
17 years old? 18 years old? She was clearly lying on the ground in a sorry state, but when she raised her head, there was clearly alienation in her eyes. There was a faint indifference that kept people 1,000 miles away, and there was also a cold arrogance that was engraved in her bones. Even if she was being criticized by thousands of people, she just stood there without moving. She did not ask for a word, nor did she complain. If she could explain, she would explain. If she could not explain clearly, she would not waste her breath. He thought that someone with Feng Ling's personality would be in a good mood today because she had regained her face. However, he did not expect that after not seeing her for a few years, not only had she grown taller and matured, but her personality was also no longer so straightforward. At least, she knew how to say some polite words to help each other. This was in line with Grandfather Li's intentions. He looked at Feng Ling for a full half a minute, making Feng Ling wonder if there was something wrong with her. A moment later, Elder Li smiled faintly. "All right, let's not talk about the past. We're old, and we can't make decisions in the base. You were raised by Nanheng. He poured all his blood and sweat into everything about you. I can't hurt his heart. Besides, you're indeed outstanding. It's undeniable that when the 4 of us were your age, Apart from having some brute force, we might not be able to defeat you with our skills. So, what else can we say? Of course, outstanding members have to stay. Besides, Li Junyan paused and suddenly said meaningfully, sooner or later, you'll be a member of our Li family. We're family, so don't torture each other. Grandfather Li's surprising attitude was enough to shock everyone present, especially the members of Team 3 who had just ridiculed Feng Ling. They stood at the back of the crowd, their faces like frosted eggplants. One moment they were green, the next black. In the end, they did not dare to say a word. However, he suddenly said that she would be a member of the Li family sooner or later. Could it be that Grandfather Li knew about the ambiguous relationship between Li Nanheng and Feng Ling? 3 years ago, these 4 elders came to drive Feng Ling away. 3 years later, they came again. Could it be that they came to see their granddaughter-in-law? Feng Ling looked at Li Junyan in shock.
Huh?
The other 3 elders were also confused. They looked at each other, then at their boss, who was sitting in the main seat, and then at Li Nanheng, who was standing at the staircase not far away with his arms crossed. Seeing that Li Nanheng seemed to be watching from afar, the 3 elders couldn't figure out what was going on today. Although they had their own tempers, since their big brother had already spoken, it was not appropriate for them to discuss among themselves in front of the base members. They simply kept quiet, but they still looked at Feng Ling in confusion. Such a tomboy. Although she was indeed fair, clean, and had delicate features, and she was indeed a woman, how could she have anything to do with the Li family? When he heard that Nanheng and this tomboy had some ambiguous feelings for each other, wasn't Brother Li Junyan the first to throw his walking stick and curse on the spot? He even said that he would never agree to it. Wasn't this slap in the face a little too fast? Without waiting for her to answer, Grandfather Li continued to talk to her. Speaking of which, you've been in the base for so many years and have known Nanheng for so many years. It's indeed time for you to go to the Li family for a meal. There are 2 chefs from China in the Li family. The Chinese food they make is very delicious. I think you'll like it. I do like Chinese food. Feng Ling paused. But wouldn't it be inconvenient to go to the Li family? Actually, it's already very much for me that you let me stay in the base. You'll be our Li family's daughter-in-law sooner or later. Right now, you're going to the Li family as a guest. In the future, going to the Li family is equivalent to going home. What's inconvenient about it? Seeing her clueless expression, Grandfather Li instantly understood why his grandson had taken so many years to win her heart. He couldn't hold it in and decided to make it clear. Chapter 1232. Holy **T. Grandfather Li recognized his granddaughter-in-law on the spot. What could be more exciting than this news in the 11 base over the years? If it were the Feng Ling from 3 years ago, she couldn't imagine that one day she would hear such a sentence in front of so many people in the base and in front of several elders of the Li family. Li Nanheng, who was still standing not far away, was helpless, but he also sighed and smiled because the old man was even more anxious than him. Feng Ling was still in a state of shock when suddenly the man's voice rang. Since you're invited to the Li family, you might as well agree. Anyway, you're busy taking care of the newcomers and can't find time to go to the Li family to eat with the elders for the time being. Agree first. Whether you go or not is up to you. Don't take it to heart. As soon as Li Nanheng finished speaking, Feng Ling abruptly glanced at him. Grandfather Li also turned his head and glared at him. He poked the ground hard with his walking stick. You bastard! In order to get your wife as soon as possible, this old man doesn't even care about my face. I'm helping you pave the way here, but you actually come to ruin my stage. I am indeed a bastard. Who doesn't know that I, Li Nanheng, have been a bastard since I was a child? It's nothing new. Li Nanheng couldn't help laughing. Feng Ling is thin-skinned. If I had known that you were going to say these words when she was unprepared, I would have found a place with fewer people. Now in public, what do you want her to say? I didn't ask her to say anything. Grandfather Li glared at him again, warning him with his eyes that he was the one making the decision now and not to undermine him. Li Nanheng moved his handsome brows with a faint smile. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be particularly embarrassed, he simply didn't say more, crossed his arms over his chest, and leaned there leisurely, but his eyes were all focused on Feng Ling. If Li Nanheng hadn't insulted his own grandfather in public for Feng Ling, the members of the base present would never have seen such a down-to-earth side of Boss Li in their lives. Even Feng Ling herself would never have thought of it. She hurriedly said, "Recently, because of the newcomers, I'm really busy. I'm afraid that if I casually agree, if I really can't find time to go, Elderly will think that I'm not sincere, and I must come to thank you." "What are you thanking me for? We'll be family in the future." Ah Feng suddenly interrupted from behind. When Feng Ling turned to look at him in surprise, he winked at her with a particularly serious expression, indicating for her to hurry up and leave the stage. "Thank you, Elderly, for your kind invitation. I'll definitely find time to go over." "Thank you, Mr. Li." However, she definitely couldn't say anything about the Li family, granddaughter-in-law, or family. She could only nod sincerely at Old Master Li. Old Master Li was satisfied and nodded. "All right, it's settled then." "Settle what?" The second son of the Li family lowered his voice and asked, "What's wrong with this Feng Ling?" "Brother, didn't you say that it would be impossible for her and Nan Heng in this lifetime? Didn't you say that if Nan Heng dared to marry her into the Li family, you would break his legs and sever their relationship? What kind of trick are you playing now?" Li Junyan did not explain. He only turned his head and said in a low voice, "I came here today because I wanted to see how the lass is doing right now. I'll tell you when I get back." The three old men couldn't understand at all, but hearing this, they could only give up. Even after the people in the base hall dispersed, Feng Ling still hadn't realized what she had just experienced. When she was about to walk out of the base hall, the man suddenly patted her on the head. She suddenly came back to herself, turned around, and almost bumped into the arms of the man behind her. She quickly steadied herself and looked inside from Li Nanheng's side. The members of the base had all dispersed, but the elders of the Li family were talking to Ah Feng inside. Li Nanheng actually did not go in to accompany them. Feng Ling subconsciously wanted to walk out, but Li Nanheng reached out and pulled her back into his arms. "Why are you hiding? What are you afraid of? Elderly is inside. You've even acknowledged him as your granddaughter-in-law. Even if they're standing by the side, you can still hug him. Behave yourself. Don't keep thinking about running away." Li Nanheng held her in his arms and looked at her dazed expression. He said lazily, "You've already been publicly acknowledged by the elders of the Li family. What else do you have to avoid?" The man's arm hugged her back heavily. Feng Ling leaned into his arms. After 2 seconds of silence, she did not struggle free. Li Nanheng was satisfied. He stroked the back of her head. "Now, have you resolved all your problems with the Li family?" "Feng Ling, I didn't have any problems. Although the elders were indeed a little too ruthless, they didn't specifically target me. After I left the base, they didn't pay attention to me again, nor did they send anyone to block my way. This means that they just didn't accept women in the base and didn't have any other thoughts. What problems can I have?" Li Nanheng rubbed her head again. He knew that she was stubborn, but he also knew that she really didn't take it to heart. "Now that nothing in the outside world will disturb you, it's time to solve your own problems." What problems do I have?" Feng Ling raised her head in his arms. The man lowered his head to look at her. As their eyes met, he looked into her clear eyes. "Remember what I said? After the newcomer assessment, I will show you something?" Feng Ling nodded. "Come to my room tonight. I'll show you." "Feng Ling." The man raised his eyebrows and pinched her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? Your period hasn't ended yet. What else can I do?" Feng Ling thought for a moment in his arms. "I see. I'll go over tonight." The man curled his lips. Seeing that she was so obedient and cooperative in front of him, he was about to kiss her on the forehead. However, before she could kiss him, Ah Feng's coughing suddenly sounded behind her in a very incongruous manner. Hearing that it was Ah Feng, the veins on Li Nanheng's forehead throbbed. He pressed Feng Ling's head into his arms and turned to look at Ah Feng as though he was looking at a dead man. "Hurry up and say it." Ah Feng was very embarrassed, and his expression was very flustered. The old master is looking for you, not me. Feng Ling won't be lost in the base. The old master wants to talk about the military. I think this matter is quite serious. Li Nanheng. He rubbed Feng Ling's head hard. He felt that she wished she could crawl into his body to avoid Ah Feng's gaze. He whispered in her ear, "Go back to the training team first. Remember to look for me tonight." Chapter 1233. It was really difficult for Feng Ling to establish her authority this afternoon. However, everyone in the team knew her temper, especially those who liked to stir up trouble. Therefore, even though they heard all kinds of rumors in the base and heard that Grandfather Li publicly recognized her as his granddaughter-in-law, they only dared to take time to look at her expression during training. They saw that her eyes and expression were normal, but she didn't seem to be in a bad mood. Relatively speaking, she should be in a good mood, but they couldn't see anything else. Finally, it was evening. Seeing that it was almost time, Feng Ling quietly avoided Ah Feng's sight and did not return to the base hall but went to Li Nanheng's residence. From a distance, she saw that the light in his room was on. Feng Ling walked over and met Xiao Su on the way. Seeing the direction she was going, Xiao Su smiled at her and chuckled for a while with an expression that said, "It's okay. You can go wherever you want. I'm not Ah Feng. I definitely won't tell on you." Feng Ling entered Li Nanheng's residence and knocked on the door twice, and the door opened. Li Nanheng had just taken a shower and came to help her open the door. He was not wearing a shirt but only a pair of black trousers. His perfect figure and well-defined muscles flashed in front of her eyes. "I knew you would come back tonight, so I took a cold shower first, in case I turned into a beast as soon as I saw you." The man still had a towel on his shoulder. He picked up the towel with one hand and wiped his short hair while speaking. At the same time, he opened the door and motioned for her to come in. It had been a long time since she entered his room. Feng Ling walked in and saw a portfolio on the table closest to the door. Her eyelids twitched when she saw the words DNA on the portfolio, followed by a string of English words. She stood rooted to the spot. Li Nanheng closed the door, walked to her side, put down the towel in his hand, and casually tugged at his short black hair, saying, "The truth you want to know is inside. If you are ready, open it. If you are not ready, leave it here, and come back when you want to see it." Even if she had guessed what Li Nanheng wanted to show her at the beginning, when she really had to face everything, she would be at a loss. Even if she was Feng Ling, it was the same. But since he was already here, there was no difference whether he went a minute earlier or a minute later. Feng Ling only stood there in silence for half a minute before she walked forward, picked up the file, opened it, and took out a stack of standard A4 papers. It was written in English and some medical terms, but she had grown up in the United States, so of course she could understand it. After reading it carefully, she silently put the document back on the table. The man's voice came from behind her. "When you were 1 year old, your parents went out to deal with business. Because you were too young and had not weaned, they could only carry you. However, on the cruise, they accidentally dropped you into the sea. This daughter that they could not hold tightly was the pain of their life. For the past 20 years, they have never slept in peace. So regardless of whether you want to reunite with your family or not, at least you should know that you are not an abandoned orphan. It's just that they all thought that you were gone." Feng Ling slowly clenched her hands into fists and then slowly loosened them. After a moment of silence, she said, "So, why did Feng Mingzhu suddenly attack me?" Li Nanheng knew that Feng Ling didn't want to go back to the Feng family. She didn't want to come into contact with those complicated family struggles. He looked at her. "Because you didn't grow up together. She doesn't have any kinship with you, only grudges and wariness. What she can see is not blood kinship, but conflicts of interest. If you are not here, she is the only child of the Feng family, the only daughter who can inherit everything. If you are here, everything will change." When he said this, Li Nanheng could imagine how uncomfortable Feng Ling would feel. However, there were some things that she could avoid, but there were some things that she had to face. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes. What he really wanted her to face was her true identity. It didn't matter whether she returned to the Feng family or not. But she had to know that she was not an abandoned orphan. She had to know that there were still many people in this world who thought of her and loved her. She also had to know that her surname was really Fengling. She was the second daughter of the Feng family, the wife that he had married by chance. Although it was not official, such a coincidence was the greatest help to him, and it was also the greatest luck in his life in the past 28 years. After the incident with the jade pendant, Fengling had thought about her relationship with the Feng family many times. She had also thought about whether she would reunite with her family in this life, and under what circumstances. However, she never expected that Li Nanheng had already known everything. When she was ready, he placed the truth in front of her. Without giving her any time to be shocked or helpless, he tore apart the truth and placed it in front of her. Li Nanheng had also thought about Fengling's attitude after knowing her background, but there was nothing. She was much calmer than he had imagined. That night, she left with the DNA test results. After returning, she didn't say anything. She didn't even answer his call. However, the next day, she returned to normal. She did what she should say and do, as though she was not affected by her background at all. She also did not mention her relationship with the Feng family, as though nothing had happened. In front of Li Nanheng, she was the same as before. There was no difference at all. Half a month later, someone came, uninvited. Of course, 11 Base was not a place that anyone could enter casually. Feng Mingzhu clamored outside the base to see Fengling, but was stopped. One day, she was even forcibly sent away by the base. However, the next day, she continued to come and no longer made a fuss. She just waited outside and said that she wanted to see Fengling. A few days later, Fengling learned about this from the newcomers who had been out of the base for a few weekends. When she walked out of the base, she saw Feng Mingzhu's car parked outside, about dozens of meters away from 11 Base. The windows were closed, and when Fengling finally appeared in front of the door, the window of the driver's seat rolled down. Feng Mingzhu took off her sunglasses in the car and glanced at her from afar. Suddenly, she started the engine angrily, stepped on the accelerator, and drove toward her. Fengling stood expressionlessly in front of the base. The two men on duty outside the base subconsciously rushed forward, but the car was too fast and rushed toward the door. Fengling did not dodge. Her eyes were cold and unruffled. The car suddenly stopped less than 2 centimeters away from her. A strong gust of wind blew against her short hair, but her eyes remained indifferent and calm. There was not the slightest hint of fear in her eyes. Chapter 1234. Seeing that Fengling was not afraid at all and didn't even frown, Feng Mingzhu angrily slammed the steering wheel, abruptly opened the car door and got out. She rushed up to her and raised her hand to slap her, but Fengling casually raised her hand and caught her wrist. Feng Mingzhu struggled hard but failed to get her wrist out of her hand. She was so angry that her face turned pale. "Miss Feng, isn't the way you greet me a bit too vulgar?" Fengling looked at her coldly and swung her hand forward. She let go of Feng Mingzhu's hand, but she staggered back a few steps before she could stand firm. Feng Mingzhu became sober because of the pain in her wrist. She closed her eyes and abruptly raised them to look at Fengling. When she planned to come to Fengling 2 days ago, she had already thought about how to deal with her. At least, she couldn't be too emotional, and her words must be reasonable so as to hit her. However, she was blocked outside for several days, and no one went in to inform her. If it weren't for a few newcomers in the base who didn't understand the situation, she might not have been able to see her. If they didn't want anyone to go in or contact with the people inside 11 Base, they could really do it in such a way that no one could think of any other way. Fortunately, Fengling came out on her own. Seeing her come out, Feng Mingzhu was so angry that she wanted to knock her to death. She knew that she couldn't beat Fengling, who came from 11 Base. The only weapon she had was a car. There was really no other way but to hit her with the car. Feng Mingzhu was so angry that she wanted to knock her to death. But Fengling didn't even dodge, and the coldness in her eyes was close to contempt. She didn't take her seriously at all. Feng Mingzhu took 2 deep breaths, barely stabilized her emotions, and suddenly said, Do you know why I came to you? Feng Ling's eyes were indifferent. Just say it. Feng Ling didn't need to hide it all. This was 11 base. Unless Feng Mingzhu really didn't want to live, if she dared to cause trouble in front of 11 base, she would implicate a lot of people. No matter how impulsive and stupid she was, she wouldn't be so reckless. Feng Mingzhu's expression darkened. She stood in front of her, only to find that even though she was wearing 5-centimeter high heels, she was barely as tall as Feng Ling some time ago. I accidentally heard about this from my grandmother and mother's conversation. Feng Mingzhu stared into her eyes. Are you really my younger sister who should have died early? Feng Ling did not speak or answer. If Feng Mingzhu hadn't gotten the evidence, she wouldn't have sent someone to kill her in the hotel, and she wouldn't have waited outside the base for several days just to see her. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't speak according to her plan, Feng Mingzhu couldn't get anything out of her. She chuckled coldly and looked at her. You know it yourself, don't you? When did you find out about your past? Do you know that you're the daughter of the Feng family and my sister? Feng Ling furrowed her brows in displeasure because of her long-winded words. You came to find me just for these useless words? Feng Mingzhu choked and gritted her teeth in anger. She abruptly raised her hand to tug at Feng Ling's collar, but Feng Ling dodged her hand imperceptibly at the moment her hand was about to touch her clothes, not letting her touch. You don't want to talk to me, but you're still willing to see me. It seems that although you don't have any feelings for the Feng family, you're actually very conflicted, aren't you? Feng Mingzhu held back her temper and looked at her with a cold smile. What's there to be conflicted about? Do you think that even if you have the blood of the Feng family flowing in your veins, even if you're really a child who fell into the sea but didn't die, what can you do? You haven't appeared in 20 years. Do you think that even if you stand in front of the Feng family's door now, you can integrate into a family? Feng Ling's eyes were cold, and her voice was calm and emotionless. Miss Feng, your focus is very strange. Do I look like someone who is willing to stand in front of the Feng family? Feng Mingzhu choked again. Then, she suddenly smiled mockingly. Feng Ling, you should be able to tell that I hate you very much, right? I can tell. Feng Ling replied coldly. In the past, I hated you, but when I found out that you were my biological sister, who should have died long ago, my hatred for you turned into hatred. Feng Mingzhu stared into her eyes. You ruined me, Feng Ling. You ruined my originally happy and worry-free life. Your shadow has accompanied me since I was young. Do you know how much I hate you? Do you know how much I hate you? You should have died 20 years ago. Why did you suddenly appear now? Feng Mingzhu raised her hand and pointed at Feng Ling's face. It's because of you. That year, you had an accident at sea. From then on, the atmosphere of the entire Feng family changed. The originally harmonious and happy family was filled with gloom every day. My grandparents, who used to dote on me, didn't even smile because of you. They didn't even have the mood to take me to the amusement park. They even invited a group of people to our house to send you off. Because of their longing and guilt for you, the entire Feng family is like the underworld. Ever since you were young, for so many years, they would set up a morning hall for you around your birthday every year. Do you know how disgusted I was every time I saw them holding the clothes you wore when you were young and sitting there to eat vegetarian food and chant Buddhist prayers for you? It's been 20 years. I haven't been forgotten for 20 years. I've also been tortured for 20 years. Feng Mingzhu gritted her teeth and pointed at her, glaring at her. But if you die, then so be it. The person I hate is just a little brat who died early, but you're standing here alive and kicking. You even stole everything from me? What right do you have? Feng Ling? What right do you have? At this moment, Feng Ling recalled how she had curled up in the cave with a hungry stomach when she was young, shivering from the cold. At that time, she seemed to not wearing any clothes. A child raised by a wolf shuttled back and forth in the jungle naked every day. She did not know right from wrong and did not care about shame. She did not live like a human at all. She closed her eyes. The calmness that she had thought was torn apart by Feng Mingzhu. She asked in a voice so soft that it was almost inaudible. What right do I have? But what did I do wrong? So much So that you still tried to kill me, even though you knew that we were related by blood? Feng Mingzhu's expression stiffened. She stared at Feng Ling in a daze. What did you say? Feng Ling opened her eyes and met hers. Do you really think you did it flawlessly? Feng Mingzhu's hands hidden in her sleeves gradually trembled. Chapter 1235. If it weren't for the Feng family, do you think your clumsy methods would really be able to protect you? Without the protection of the Feng family, you would have died countless times. Miss Feng, if you don't have enough IQ, you should know how to behave yourself and not do anything out of line. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to kill me, but I will also witness your stupidity. When Feng Ling said this, she stared straight into Feng Mingzhu's eyes. There was indifference in her gaze, and there was a hint of mockery in it. She deliberately kept a distance from her. In the base, when Li Nanheng learned that Feng Ling had gone to see Feng Mingzhu, he frowned coldly, put down what he was doing, and turned to walk out. When he was about to walk out of the main entrance of the base, he saw that Feng Ling was still standing at a distance from Feng Mingzhu. She was still standing upright with her back facing the base. Feng Mingzhu was so angry that her eyes were about to pop out of her sockets. Li Nanheng could clearly see her. Feng Ling was a strong-willed person, but no matter what she was facing, whether she was happy or sad, whether she could hold on or not, she was used to not begging anyone. Even if it was him, she would not easily show her weak side in front of him. This habit of hers was not good, very bad. Miss Feng, you have your resentment, but I don't seem to be in the wrong. Even my fate is passive. I passively accept the fact that I am an orphan, and I passively accept the fact that I am your sister. I don't remember blocking your path. You said that I destroyed everything you had and stole everything from you? I, Feng Ling, don't seem to have anything else other than the 11 base behind me, nor have I stolen anything from you. Feng Ling said indifferently, I advise you to guard your Feng family well. Don't provoke me in the future. I'm not interested in your Feng family. Your Feng family. Feng Ling's tone and attitude clearly showed that she had no intention of going back to acknowledge her. It was as though she wanted to bury the truth in her stomach and did not want to mention it to anyone. Feng Mingzhu stared at her for a long time before she suddenly sneered. Do you think you didn't steal anything from me? She abruptly took a step forward and pressed close to Feng Ling, looking at her face to face. Her voice was filled with hatred and unwillingness. The man I loved the most since I was young has already been snatched away by you. What else do you want to snatch from me? I have loved Li Nanheng for so many years, but he would rather marry you, a dead man's cenotaph, than marry me. How absurd.
Ha!
The dignified young master, Li, married the cenotaph of a dead baby girl. The Li family even moved your cenotaph into the ancestral hall. Isn't that funny? Feng Ling's eyelids instantly trembled. Ever since she saw Feng Mingzhu outside the door, this was the first time she looked at her seriously with some surprise. Seeing Feng Ling's expression, Feng Mingzhu sneered. Don't tell me you don't know about this? Feng Ling did not speak. She restrained her emotions in time. I was wondering why he suddenly said those words at the Feng family that day. What did he mean by not marrying another woman? Feng Mingzhu paused and then smiled coldly.
It turns out that he already knew at that time.
Feng Mingzhu then spat to the side.
Pay.
Despicable. Feng Ling did not speak for a while. On one hand, she was digesting what she had just learned. On the other hand, she was observing Feng Mingzhu in front of her. From her movements, she vaguely sensed that Feng Mingzhu's emotions were unstable. Last time, she heard from Madame Feng that Feng Mingzhu's emotions were unstable. Every day, she would cause trouble at home. Later, she was taken abroad by her friends to relax, but after she returned, she clearly did not untie the knot in her heart and even dug into a dead end. Seeing her weak appearance, Feng Ling really did not have the patience to reason with her normally. However, Feng Ling did not come out in vain. At the very least, she now knew the reason. So, 3 years ago, the so-called marriage alliance between the Feng and Li families, the marriage alliance that made her drink all night, was actually just her being jealous of herself? Li Nanheng actually married her own cenotaph. Miss Feng's emotions are unstable. Send her back. Feng Ling indifferently instructed the two base members in front of the door. Without wasting any more time here, she turned and left. I haven't finished speaking. Seeing that she was about to leave, Feng Mingzhu quickly took a step forward but was blocked by the two base members in front of the door. She was about to push her away in anger, but Feng Ling had already walked in without looking back. She had just walked back to the base and had only taken a few steps when a pair of black leather boots suddenly appeared in her sight. Looking up, she saw a pair of straight and powerful legs wrapped in black trousers. She paused, raised her eyes with a jerk, and met Li Nanheng's eyes. She looked at him and suddenly did not know what to say. She kept her voice low and did not speak. Li Nanheng raised his handsome brows. Where is my little wife going? Feng Ling. In the past, when she heard the words little wife, she only thought that he was shamelessly teasing her. Now, she suddenly realized that he really had a reason to call her that. In an instant, her heart violently beat several times. Then, she thought of how she had been inexplicably jealous for so many years. She felt a little embarrassed. Without saying anything, she was about to walk away. However, the man reached out and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head to look at her embarrassed expression and laughed. If it was in the past, even if Feng Mingzhu waited outside to die, you wouldn't come out to see her. This time, you came out first. Feng Ling slightly turned her head away because of the man's approaching breath. I'm not interested in anything else she wants to say. Before I found out about her background, I didn't care about anything else. But in the past few days, I just wanted to know what kind of feelings and thoughts she had to use such a stupid method to deal with me, so I took the time to see her. So? The man's breath brushed against her ear. Seeing her uncomfortable expression, he guessed that she had found out something, but he did not point it out. He only whispered in her ear with a faint smile. What conclusion did you come to? What other conclusion could there be? Feng Mingzhu had grown up in the shadow of a dead sister. The disgust and hatred in her bones were too obvious. She didn't answer, but Li Nanheng clearly saw through her. He raised his hand and patted her shoulder gently. You're of the same bloodline and grew up in a different environment. That's why there's such a big contrast in personality. You grew up in a wolf cave, so you never asked for much, so happiness comes too easily. Some people don't have to worry about food and clothing. They have everything they want since they were young, but it's just because they want too much. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.